Hello, this is Storybooks channel. New videos are posted every day. Subscribe and click the bell.
As a child, Camille was considered strange in the yard because she was not afraid of the dentist. When other children were being dragged into the dentist's office by their parents, hysterical and red-faced from crying, Camille was eager to peer through the narrow slit in the door and get a glimpse of what was going on. She was not afraid during dental treatment. Maybe because she didn't eat a lot of sweets, or maybe because everything that was going on aroused the girl's keen interest. She followed every movement of the doctors and afterwards asked 1,000,000 questions, flapping her naive, childish eyes. The sound of the machine, the miracles of solidifying fillings, white coats. It was all a special world for 8-year-old Camille. It was no surprise to anyone that upon graduation from high school, the girl firmly decided to become a dentist. All high school, she prepared diligently, learned chemical formulas, and diligently solved biology tests. Sometimes Camille put on a white coat at home, a cap, and imagined how to conduct the reception of patients. She had once borrowed it from a neighbor who worked as a pediatrician at the local clinic. "And why do you want to pick the teeth of other people's uncles and aunts, Camille?" Her mother sighed, stirring the soup in the pot. "Well, you want to teach capricious children." "Flipping through a book," answered the daughter. "It seems that you went to your grandmother." The woman grinned. "Only she was a veterinarian, and you decided to get to people." Camille grinned understandingly. Kathy's grandmother had worked as a zoo technician in the village for a long time, until she retired. And even afterward, at the director's request, she often came to check on the condition of the animals and deliver cows in difficult labor. At the same time, Grandma was not shy to cover young graduates of the Veterinary Institute who had just arrived at the farm and did not even know that it was dangerous to approach the cows and horses from behind. When the farm was disbanded, strong on her word, the elderly woman continued to be called by the locals. So, as long as there were at least a couple of cows in the village, there was plenty of work. Kathy lived where she had worked half her life, in a backwoods village. Camille's mom, Miranda, took a different path. She didn't want to live in the village and went to the city, hoping to fit into the new environment and achieve a title higher than honorary milkmaid. However, the city did not treat Miranda as favorably as she would have liked. The woman did not advance beyond elementary school teacher, but she received a small one-room apartment for her length of service, the kind of apartment where the kitchen is already cramped for 2 people. Camille was born and raised there. No matter how cozy it was under the wing of her mother, but since 15 years the girl thought about living separately. But where to? The modest salary of a teacher did not allow such a luxury. Her father stayed with them for a short time. Like many truckers, he lived for 2 families, of which neither of them knew. In the end, the man simply did not return from another trip. The mother waited 6 months and then, gathering her courage, filed for a unilateral divorce. Camille was secretly sad. She loved her father, and she missed his care, advice, and experience. However, her mother did not start any new relationships after such an outburst. She lived with her work and her daughter. The final exams came, followed by vacations. And now Camille stood in front of the doors of the medical school, struggling with shyness to enter. She had passed by countless times, dreaming of how she would get her student card and credit. But now the familiar outer walls seemed harsh, pressuring, even though the fulfillment of her dream depended on them. It felt strange. "You're not a sophomore." Someone touched her elbow. Camille turned around and saw a girl, a blonde girl with a pointy nose and oddly age-inappropriate brightly colored hairpins. I think she was a sophomore. Camille opened her student ID. Yeah, sophomore year. Cool. The stranger glowed and clapped Camille on the shoulder a little too suddenly. At last you found someone. My name is Clara, by the way. Camille, let's go find our group in office. Gradually, Camille and Clara became friends to such an extent that even their teachers began to call them an inseparable couple. The calm, reserved Camille and the volcanic Clara. Studying was not easy. Camille was warned about it by both teachers at school and her mother. Medicine does not tolerate amateurs and students. From the very first year of study, they persecuted mercilessly. Sometimes Camille fell asleep over her notes. Head puffy from the incredible amount of information learned, early rising, and the long road to the institute too exhausted. But the main thing was that her childhood dream, albeit slowly, but approached her. Clara did not strain herself so much. She often read magazines in her classes. She could oversleep and in general perceived going to the institute only as an excuse to dress up. They'll expel you after the first session. Sometimes Camille would say to her careless friend, "Oh, I just need this crust for a beautician." Clara waved it off. "But to get it you have to pass your exams with at least a C." Camille stopped her. "I have enough knowledge for a C," confidently declared the village fashionista. In fact, Clara was not so lazy. She just had a different world view. Instead of studying every day, she preferred to stay up the night before the seminar to answer before forgetting what she had read. She took notes from her neighbors and used textbooks and manuals to prop up the wobbly table in her room. She was not a lazy Clara, and because she immediately began to look for some part-time jobs, or rather, they found it themselves, to hand out flyers at the dormitory or something to take somewhere for a small fee. So, by the end of the semester, she was invited to work evening shifts as a barista in a small coffee shop. She brewed coffee a little better than the cleaning lady, but she made eyes at all the visitors and smiled with 32 teeth. She left good tips, on which the girl bought cosmetics and new handbags. Rustic directness and simplicity pierced where the city was difficult. Clara was not afraid to look stupid, and it always played to her advantage. She had a goal, too, and the girl was going about it simply in her own way. Camille was always fun with Clara. She knew the latest gossip, had a lot of funny stories to tell. She could do her makeup in the bathroom before class. On one of the frosty days before the session, Camille stood at the bus stop in the morning, waiting for the bus, and a few other people crowded together with her. Time was running out, and the right bus was still missing. The grannies behind Camille were getting louder and louder. A man in an old-fashioned fur hat and a briefcase like an office worker finally couldn't stand it and asked the driver of the next bus where the number 14 had disappeared to. "They've all been written off." He shrugged indifferently. "Now you can only go to the center with transfers." Rumors that the bus would be liquidated had been circulating for a long time. But as it happens, everything happened at the most inopportune moment. The man in the fur hat cursed loudly, not embarrassing the passengers, and began to hurriedly call a cab. Camille realized that she would have to do the same in order not to be late. As luck would have it, the first class was a seminar with a very picky professor who wouldn't let latecomers in. To get to the institute, Camille gave away all her money, even scraped change from the farthest pockets. She ran into the auditorium a moment before the bell rang and, breathing loudly, flopped down on the bench next to Clara. "Where have you been?" "I was already thinking about how to get you out of school." She pounced on her friend with questions. "My bus doesn't run anymore," Camille complained, laying out her notebook. "I have no idea how to get there now. It's either a round trip across the city or a cab. So you move into my dorm. Clara's the one who yelled at me. 5 minutes and you're in school. Just remember to brush your teeth. Camille wanted to object, but suddenly realized that the idea is not so bad. And if it was a choice between her getting up an hour earlier and an expensive cab, Clara and the hostel won either way. After all, she'd wanted to live on her own for a long time. Room fees were ridiculous for students. She spent more on commuting from home, and she could go to her mom's on weekends. My roommate had just moved out, so that, as they say, all the cards were stacked against each other. Clara theatrically raised her hands to the ceiling. You'll write an application to the commandant, and they'll move you in quickly. Camille nodded. The time we spent on the road could be used for more useful purposes, studying, walking. We could get a good night's sleep. The commandant was a little nagged when she gave her papers. What are you doing? She's a local. I have to settle in non-residence. The girl kept silent, knowing that she was obliged to settle in. The commandant once again looked at her with the look of a dog, wanting to bark at a passerby in case of something, but there was no such thing. In the end, she accepted the application and told her the date of settlement. We almost walked out of the dormitory. She squeezed Camille in her arms so tightly that she even squeaked. Yay, yay, now we're together. The mother took the news of her daughter's future move with enthusiasm. The apartment was cozy, but cramped, and this fact, alas, did not change even motherly love. Did not eat there only all kinds of nasty things. Miranda admonished her daughter, putting towels and a new set of bed linen in her bag, and don't drink at my place. She expressively, but rather jokingly, threatened with her fist. Or this Clara, your friend, Wendy, will start to influence you badly. The woman continued, Mom, she's fine. Camille defended her friend. She's just peculiar. A few days later, on her day off, she arrived at the dormitory with her things. Clara was already waiting for her, helped her bring everything in, helped her get settled, showed her where everything was. The room was small, but here Camille had her own separate bed, her own table, a closet, a shelf, and a whole wall. All in all, it wasn't too bad. The main thing was that it was a couple minutes from the university, and the rest would get used to it. In the evening of the same day, Camille and Clara were walking down the corridor, and suddenly they were called. Hello, girls. A student peeked out of a nearby room. Hi, Michael. Clara turned around and tilted her head to the side, like a mappy looking at a shiny bauble. What do you want? Come join us. We lack female company. The guy waved his hand invitingly. We'll feed you, we'll make you drunk. We won't leave you offended. We're celebrating a birthday, after all. Camille tugged Clara's elbow questioningly. It's Michael from 3rd year, who's been after me since the beginning of the semester, she whispered back. He's not bad, but he's a bit stupid. And you want to go? Camille took another look at the boy who was persistently beckoning them to come along. Why not? Clara looked puzzled and looked at her. Tomorrow is Sunday anyway. There's no need to go anywhere. We'll sit and chat. We're all friends. There's nothing to be afraid of. She turned to Michael. Okay, we'll be there soon. Wait. The guy glowered, gave them a thumbs up, and disappeared into the room. Camille hesitated for a moment, but then she thought about it. She hadn't really made friends with anyone except Clara in 6 months of school. Of course, she talked to her classmates, but it wasn't the same, and her old school friends visited less and less often and wrote shorter and shorter letters. They all had their own worries. and they didn't understand why she had to go to an institute on the other side of town. Clara quickly combed her hair, changed from pants to jeans, and found a decent t-shirt in the closet. Camille didn't bother with that. She just pinned her hair up. There were 3 guys and a girl in the room, apparently the couple of the birthday boy, tall, thin, but very hospitable. The old acquaintance greeted the girls and introduced the company. "This is Liam, the birthday boy, and his lady Cindy. This is John, the future of urban medicine. And this," Michael jabbed his finger at the guy sitting on a chair by the window, "Robert from the journalism department." The girls were welcomed and seated at a common table. After a while, the shyness of acquaintance evaporated without a trace. Everyone was drinking, eating, and joking. Cindy suggested playing crocodile. The boys readily moved the beds to make room. Camille stared blankly at all the new acquaintances. Michael was chatting with Clara, and it was obvious that he liked her. He was trying to lift her up, picking invisible crumbs off her shoulder, scratching the back of her head. Liam and Cindy had been together for a long time. It was evident in their communication and warmth toward each other. Camille even had a note of distant jealousy running through her mind. She'd dated a guy in high school, but he'd never treated her with the care and warmth these two had for each other. John made occasional jokes about doctors during breaks when his mouth wasn't full of food. He'd already put a couple ketchup stains on his shirt, but would that stop a man with a big appetite? Robert was the only one Michael introduced differently than the others. He didn't fit at the table. He sat by the window with a plate in his hands, but that didn't stop the young man from collecting all the stares. He told stories, joked, asked provocative questions, and posed picturesquely. "Robert's a blabbermouth," said Liam. "He chose his profession just to scratch his tongue. It's better to scratch your tongue than to pick at people." The student journalist theatrically grimaced, which immediately caused laughter of the company. "And what's wrong with helping people?" Camille suddenly asked. Everyone fell silent and stared at her with interest. Robert himself looked at the guest. "Well, you are not going to help them for free, are you? Or are you going to open a branch of the Mother Teresa Society?" He sarcastically teased Camille. "I want to help. First of all, I go into the profession at the call of my heart, not because it is profitable," parried the girl. "And you need to eat, so stop covering your ambition with charity." Robert waved his hand at her. "Sooner or later people will become just a means of earning money for you. But some people will earn money by talking, and others will see rotten teeth and other unpleasant things in the human body. Robert, enough of this argument you've been having with us for 3 years. All professions are needed, and all have their talents." Liam said conciliatingly, "Let's have a drink and play cards." Camille looked at Robert with an annoyed look, but did not argue further, so as not to offend the birthday boy. The trouble was, she liked the smug talker. Robert had a typical smarmy appearance, chiseled facial features, dark hair, strong charisma, and a sharp mind. Gradually, the angular conversation lubricated and the tension it had created went away. The party had passed 0 o'clock when there was a knock on the door. "Quiet," Liam hissed. "The commandant has arrived." Before Camille knew it, the table was covered with a sheet. Cindy and Jonah were hidden under one bed, Clara and Michael under another, and she and Robert were shoved into the closet. Everything happened so fast that hardly a fly could have flown in that time. The commandant's voice was heard, reprimanding Liam in a half-toned voice for the noise and mess after lights out, and the latter was making every effort to demonstrate the supposedly empty room. And so it was every time. Robert sighed, Camille over his ear. "He's hiding us in closets, the idiot." The closet was cramped. Camille felt her back against the guy's chest and almost stepped on his feet. For some reason, her cheeks were flaming and her tongue was lolling. Robert gingerly touched her shoulder, as much as it was possible to do while standing in a closet full of clothes. "I'm sorry, okay? It's just nature's way of picking things apart. That was rude." Without turning around, Camille replied. She could feel the guy's guilt. Was he guilty? Breathing on the back of her neck, it was getting stuffy. "Let's go out tomorrow as an apology. Pick your own place." Robert put his hand on her forearm. The commandant let go of the last nagging remark, wagged her finger at Liam, and made to leave. Goosebumps ran up and down her body. It was hot and cold at the same time. There was tension in the air again, but lingering, enveloping. "Come on," Camille agreed. "To the exhibition of modern artists in the gallery." "All right. I'll be waiting outside the dormitory at 5. The closet doors swung open. "Why haven't you two had a fight?" Liam laughed. "Almost." Robert was the first to jump out and winked at Camille. "You all right?" "Why did they put you and that ashhole in there?" Clara clucked, giving the guy a stare. "I think we're going on a date with that ashhole." Camille whispered quietly, trying to hide her red cheeks and the stupid love sparkle in her eyes. "Camille, you have golden hands." The grateful patient smiled goodbye and left the office. Camille took off her gloves and nodded to herself in the mirror. It was for moments like this that she had gone to the dentist's office, for grateful looks and sincere appreciation. And she didn't regret the years she'd spent studying. First 5 years in medical school, then residency for another 3 years. Paperwork for the registrar's office, a robe to take home to wash, so what else? Call Clara. They were supposed to meet today for a professional holiday. Camille threw on her coat, said goodbye to the girls at the reception desk, and hurried to the store for a cake. Clara still had a sweet tooth from the university. No one was home yet. Robert warned that he would be at the agency until the evening. While he was still studying, he started working part-time there. 7 years later, he took the editor's chair himself. But Robert had connections with every authority in the city, from vegetable stalls to the prosecutor's office. They got married while still at the institute, a year after they started their relationship and that meeting in the dormitory. Clara had convinced her that Robert was good, of course, but that he liked to show off. Her mother didn't take the profession of journalism seriously. What kind of work is it? Collecting gossip? Like plowing or sewing grain in a factory. That's a job. That's a job. When Camille came to visit on weekends and raved about her boyfriend, Robert was not what he seemed at first glance and not what everyone else saw him as. He knew how to be caring and delicate, and even restrained his desire to pick everything to the bone. At the same time remained the soul of the company, Noisy Lighter. Many girls openly envied Camille, frankly looked at Robert when they appeared at the institute. "There's nothing to see here," Clara waved her hands at them. "They're not here for the ballet." Although she was initially against the relationship between Camille and Robert, she soon became an ardent defender of their peace of mind and was even a bridesmaid at the wedding. Not without pride, informing the guests that without her the young people would not have met. It might have seemed that Clara had nothing better to do. But how wrong were those who thought so? Village fashionista had affairs with 2, 3 at a time, never bored in the evenings, sometimes choosing from several candidates, and was not shy to use her natural beauty. Those problems that she herself did not want to solve were solved by suitors. That's how she finished her studies, not really knowing what she was studying for. She got her medical degree as a working makeup artist. She didn't go to any residency program, and sat in a beauty studio, having mastered in addition to makeup and hair and other beauty procedures. From boredom or windiness, married and 6 months later divorced. A year more fluttered on dates and married again. Clara wasn't lazy. She was just lucky. And she was never shy about doing things that others disapproved of. That's why she won where others stopped. Camille sometimes thought that her road was straight and quiet, where you could see all the stops and bumps for miles ahead. Clara's road wiggled like a snake and went into potholes or under clouds. The important thing was that eventually they both ended up with a destination. The tea was getting cold. Camille was already thinking of calling her friend, who was almost an hour late, when she heard a commotion in the entryway and a call. Can you imagine the client was late? She delayed me, and then the cab was still running. Clara started to get indignant. Camille just smiled. They hugged. It couldn't have been otherwise. Over the years, Slava had changed from a country girl with ambition into a cold city beauty. She cut her hair in a bob, always wore makeup and fashionably dressed. And she was more concerned with a new skirt and going for a massage than having groceries at home. Oh, you're cooking, I see. Clara had barely made it into the kitchen and immediately stuck her nose into the pots on the stove and into the refrigerator. And borscht and stuffed cabbage and compote. Camille did not chase brands and hairstyles. She dressed minimalistically and simply. But she knew how to create coziness and keep up with everything. William nags me for not cooking. Clara complained. Everyone has their own talents. Camille calmed her down by pouring tea. The friendly chat went on late into the night. It was always like this when they met. The cake was almost over and Camille was making coffee for the third time. When Robert finally came home, the young editor was disheveled and twitchy. He came into the kitchen, said hello briefly, hugged his wife, and retired to his room, saying he had had a hard day. Why is he so sour? Asked Clara, glancing at the man. Tired, I guess. Camille shrugged her shoulders. You can't force him to sit down at the table. Come on, come on. Clara jumped up from her chair and reached for her friend's shoulder. What is this? She picked up a red hair with 2 long fingernails and showed it to the surprised Camille. Ah, she mewed in surprise. Maybe it was accidentally blown in? Yeah, say it was blown in by the wind. Clara stared at her with her hands at her sides. I'm a friend of the men, know them like a peel. Came tired in other people's hair, just worked hard, poor guy. What are you implying that he? Camille moved into the room. I'm not implying anything yet, but I have the fact on my fingers. Clara shrugged her shoulders. We need to watch him. Think of something strange going on. Camille thought for a moment. Her friend's suspicion had shifted the bricks of her inner fortress just a little, but it was enough to make the structure shake just a little. Robert replaced Camille, and the father she had been deprived of became both friend and husband at once. The first years they lived, soul to soul, understood each other without words, and as if the whole universe was formed in the merger of 2 dissimilar characters. Then they experienced several crises. Quarrels were like everyone else's, but they quickly became the past. The last year they lived a very measured relationship, but loaded professionally. Both worked hard to achieve their goals. Maybe they've been socializing less. Is everything okay in bed? She was interrogated by Clara. Well, maybe because of the work we've been doing, we've been socializing a little less. Yes, Camille agreed. Why do you even bother? 1 hair and you're already panicking. Hair is where it all starts. Clara put her finger up authoritatively. I advise you to go through his pockets, sniff his shirts, and his laptop too. I'm not sniffing shirts. What kind of nonsense is that? Camille was indignant, although subconsciously doubts had already taken hold of her. Also, go to his workplace. Maybe they've got a red-haired trainee there, Clara said in a conspiratorial whisper. They chatted for a while, and Clara went home. Oh, I almost forgot. My salon will celebrate the anniversary of the opening. Come with Robert. You're my regular. At the cafe next week, Friday. Well, come, of course. Camille nodded. Smell the shirts, though. Clara winked, sent a kiss, and disappeared into the elevator. Unwillingly, Camille began to look at her husband. Before Clara's words, she had never thought of accusing him of infidelity. Of course, that fact was vaguely believable, but still. One evening, Camille went through her husband's things. God, what am I doing? She asked herself when she actually sniffed the collar of Robert's favorite shirt. It didn't smell suspicious, and there was no hair either. Camille calmed down and put Clara's words out of her mind. Clara is Clara, and her Robert is not like that. She had long ago accepted his job and the need to socialize with a bunch of people in a day. Not many people her husband could have had a meeting with. That's ridiculous. Robert, we're all right, aren't we? Camille asked on the way to the cafe. She didn't know why she had asked. The inner turmoil hadn't completely gone away. Robert turned to her. Yes, why are you asking all of a sudden? Why am I asking? Camille wondered. You can't tell me you found a hair. Lately you've been at work. We don't talk much. She stretched. But you know that I have a lot of things to do and responsibilities every day. Soon I'll take an assistant and relax a little. Robert smiled at her. Oh, here we are. Slaga was already waiting for them at the entrance, apparently tipsy and in full battle paint. She was friends with the owner of the salon and had even bought a small share of the business from her, so she could invite anyone to the party. Camille sometimes wondered where the careless Clara got the money for such a thing, but the mystery remained a mystery. The mini-corporate party was a lot of fun. The women's company was diluted by a few men. The owner's husband, a guy, a masseur, and the husbands of Camille and Clara. Camille, a friend's new husband, was hardly known to her. She had only seen him at the wedding and had little recollection of where he had come from. William looked frankly bored. Constantly attached to glasses with champagne, sighed and very sluggishly participated in the general celebration. The hostess raffled off certificates for free treatments among the guests. Camille successfully won one of them and hurried to please her husband, who went outside for a smoke. She jumped out of the door and looked around puzzled. Only Clara was outside, talking on the phone. Have you seen Robert? Her friend asked her. Clara put the phone away in her purse. Camille, while you were participating in the raffle, your husband poured wine on his pants and went to change. And we got a delivery of new manicure tables. They're idiots. They got their days mixed up. I'm rushing to the salon to pick them up so I don't ruin the party. I'll be right back. Have fun. She jumped into a cab and drove away. Baffled, Camille called Robert. He confirmed that he had doused his pants, would change and be back soon. Miss me? She heard a voice from behind her. William came out of the door, Camille replied. No. They had said hello very crudely in the first few minutes. The girl wondered why her husband had not warned her and had left so hastily. Let's have a talk or something. William kept up. I don't know anyone here but you, and there's nothing to talk about with these women. They're all talking about manicures and new hair colors. He yawned tiredly and flicked his lighter. Well, let's do it. Camille agreed, realizing she was in a similar situation. William asked about work and his habits, his studies. only when he started to talk about himself. He complained about Clara, either explicitly or implicitly. Camille knew he was drunk, but for some reason she listened. She'd never talked to someone like that about her friend. It was as if she'd been given a glimpse into a secret suitcase. She cooks once a week, and then some crap that's impossible to eat. I'm used to home cooking. My mom was a cook all her life. William sighed. Here you work from morning till night. You want soup, cutlets, pies, and she buys salads or dumplings. Eat up, sweetheart. Ah, but she puts on makeup for 3 hours. Why did you get married then? Camille asked me carefully. Changing to you. She's so beautiful, you can't take your eyes off her. When I first saw her, I was blinded, but now I realize that you can't eat beauty alone. William finished smoking, moved closer and whispered, and I gave her money for a share in the salon, damn it. I thought at least she'd stop hanging around there herself and go home and earn an income. But she didn't. Camille suddenly felt sorry for William. She realized that his rose-colored glasses had shattered inside. On the one hand, he'd seen who he'd married. On the other hand, beauty always messes with a man's head. I would like a wife like you, Camille, calm, responsible, domestic, who is ready to bring up children, not to paint chickens in front of the mirror. Suddenly William said, looking into her eyes. Camille staggered back and pulled her fingers out of William's palm, which he had already managed to grasp. I don't think that's a good idea. The girl cut him off. It's high time we went back inside. She turned and walked quickly into the cafe. Her heart was pounding frantically. There was bewilderment and shame in her head, ticking behind her ears. Camille sat down in her seat at the table and poured half a glass of wine. Should she tell Clara what had happened? William's complaints and his fatuous innuendos. She'd start questioning him. They'd have a fight. They'll have to discuss it all again. No, let them deal with their own problems and with each other. Camille drank her drink in one gulp and reached for a sandwich. For some reason, she felt sick to her stomach. She wanted to hug Robert, but he had disappeared. She called. Her husband answered that he was almost there, but he was stuck in traffic. Finally, he entered the cafe wearing jeans and a t-shirt. About 10 minutes later, Clara burst in, out of breath, desperately arguing on the phone with someone. What idiots! This is not a company, it's a silent horror. Clara rumbled, sitting down on a chair next to them. Not only did they show up on the wrong day, but they almost hurt me. She pointed to a barely visible bruise on her elbow and an abrasion on her forearm. I'm sorry it took so long, Camille. Robert hugged her from behind. It's crazy driving in this traffic. Why didn't you warn me? Asked Camille. I was standing in the middle of the hall, pardon me, with wet pants. I don't have time to talk. I hurried to the car and rushed to change my pants. Robert guiltily spread his hands apart. Next to him, Clara continued to make noise and resent him. Camille calmed down a little when she felt her husband's hand. At the other end of the table sat silent William and glared at her through the wall of a clear glass. A few days passed. Camille was finishing up her work at the clinic and her mood was good. The last 8-year-old patient had simply delighted her with his courage and resilience. He even hugged the doctor's aunt goodbye and under his mom's proud gaze, embarrassedly said, "Thank you." Of course, Camille could not just let the little hero out of the office and handed him a new toothbrush, which was left by the brand representative for promotional purposes. The young doctor had already said goodbye to all her colleagues and was standing at the door when the phone in her pocket rang. "Camille, help me out." Clara's voice sounded in the receiver. "Come, model? My student and I need to practice, and the model is sick." "Now?" Camille was surprised. "Yes, it's urgent," Clara begged. "Okay, I'll be right there." She hung up. Camille often helped her friend out. It was not difficult and pleasant, because afterwards she always came home with beautiful makeup and styling, and Clara's training was not disrupted. It took Camille about half an hour to get to the salon, and they were waiting for her. Seated in a chair and under the popular tracks of the radio air, Clara and her student began to work. The girlfriend was scattered in another gratitude and scolded the irresponsible student, a model who did not come. When the work was done and the student went home, Slaga offered Camille to stay and have a cup of coffee, and it turned out very well. Looking at the makeup, Clara said approvingly, "She's a smart girl, maybe something good will come out of her." Camille theatrically flapped her eyelashes, turned one side and then the other. At the same time, she caught a glimpse of the old manicure tables. Camille would not have confused them. She had been to Clara's office so many times that she had already memorized how the tables stood and on which one, how the light from the window fell. "Didn't you say your desks were going to be replaced?" She looked questioningly at her makeup artist friend. "Where are they?" "And they turned out to be defective. We sent them back." Waved her hand. "What, all at once?" Camille was puzzled. "Yes, they all have scratched countertops. I told you the movers were idiots, banging them against each other like crazy." Clara brushed the shadow off her friend's cheek with a brush. "They ruined our holiday and our nerves. Did they hit you with the tables too?" Camille nodded at the greenish bruise on the makeup artist's elbow. "Aha!" Clara didn't even look at her arm. "They opened the door as if it were their own house, and I was knocked for company." My friends had finished their coffee and had long ago switched to another topic when Clara, who was scrolling through the news feed on her phone, suddenly rushed in. "Camille, look." She shoved the phone with the photo open on the screen. The girl looked at the picture and was surprised. The photo was of the entire staff of the agency where Robert worked. The guys were holding some certificates in their hands. Apparently, another award from the big shots. But another thing was interesting. Next to Robert stood a young red-headed girl. "Aha!" shouted Clara triumphantly. "I told you so. I told you so. I told you so." Camille said, looking at the photograph. She felt sick to her stomach. The nasty feeling from the conversation with William and the running around at home, from the discovery of the red hair, came back again. "It's all right, Camille. We'll expose him." Clara clenched her manicured fingers into a fist. "If anything, you'll be the first to file for divorce." "What divorce, Clara?" Camille jumped up, her cheeks flaming. "It's not clear yet. It's clear as day, dear friend." She folded her arms authoritatively across her chest. "Your Robert's gone rogue. We gotta go in there and rip that redhead's hair out." "Okay." Camille put her hands on her temples. "I don't believe this nonsense." "Okay," agreed Clara. "Watch him very carefully this week. Men are always wrong about little things." "I will." Camille nodded. She wanted to hint at William's behavior, but didn't. Offense could make a mess of things. Besides, Clara was just drawing her own conclusions, a little obsessive, but for now there was no one to take offense at, and nothing to take offense for. Robert was behaving normally. Camille, attuned to Clara's confidence, began to covertly follow her husband, something she usually never did. Until that day, Camille had thought that there was no point in restricting her partner's freedom, forbidding something, scandals, or jealousy scenes. She had realized this when she was still a student, although she loved Robert very much. She admired him as a man, as a human being. The more controlling, the more likely the opposite effect. And to arrange emotional swings with a choleric sanguine like her husband is a noisy and dangerous task. Scenes and emotions to him enough at work, at home wanted peace. He said so himself. During the day, the young editor, like a chameleon, adjusted to anyone who got to his office, and in the evening at home, wanted to be himself. Feeling like a failing schoolgirl, Camille rummaged through her husband's backpack, his notebook while he was in the shower. On the pages of the notebook, she found a list of phone numbers and women's names. In his jacket pocket, a strange pink-colored pen. Her heart pounded loudly, thudding in her ears as if it had been covered with a bucket. "Camille, what are you doing?" Robert stood in the doorway, looking at his wife in amazement. The girl froze with the evidence in her hands. "Are you accusing me of something?" The man folded his arms across his chest. "What is it?" Camille jabbed her finger at the list of numbers. "These are the candidates for the assistant position." The husband shrugged indifferently. "I interviewed them last week and put them all here." "Why? Did you use this?" Camille waved a pink, girlish pen in the air. "First my own, then I ran out of paste, and Kelly lent me her writing utensils. What's the problem? Why are you going through my stuff?" Robert glanced around at the slight mess on the desk. Nostrils dilating, Camille felt like a fool. She replied something, and under her nose, she slipped the notebook and pen to her husband and went into the kitchen. His explanations were very convincing, but the worm of paranoia continued to gnaw its way through her thoughts. Camille crushed her whiskey with her hands and sat down at the table in the kitchen. She grabbed her phone and texted Clara about what had happened. The makeup artist didn't believe her friend's husband's excuses and offered to follow up with him to be sure. Camille looked at her schedule, figured something out, and texted back, "Go ahead." Camille went to bed late. Robert was already on his 10th dream when she finally settled down. Before that, she stared at her sleeping husband's face for a long time, trying to find answers to the questions that tormented her. In the morning, she pulled herself together, pretended that nothing had happened, walked Robert to work, and waited for Clara. Her friend arrived just as Robert drove out of the yard. "You ready?" Clara's voice was filled with an ill-concealed excitement, as if she'd been waiting a long time for permission. "Do I have a choice?" Camille looked at her, buckling her seatbelt in the car. "Well, you might not like what you see, if you see anything," corrected Clara, shrugging her shoulders. "But it would be better not to see anything, of course. He's gotten kind of aloof." Camille murmured as they caught up with Robert on the road and pulled a few cars farther away. He seemed fine, but something was wrong. That's how it starts. Clara nodded, gazing down the road. First they get cold, and then they start lying. Our feminine instincts can't be fooled. Did your previous husband cheat on you? Camille suddenly blurted out for some reason. Clara jerked faintly at the wheel, so surprised by the question. Sebastian? Maybe he cheated, very probably. She threw it back vaguely, but I didn't care anymore. I went on a date. I realized I was sick of Sebastian. I felt sorry for him. I didn't tell him, and when I got sick of him, I filed for divorce. Aren't you afraid William might cheat on you? Camille could barely contain her impulse to spill the truth. William? Please. Clara waved her hand and instantly relaxed. He's head over heels in love with me, like a doggy waiting for me at all times. Is so in love, she muttered under her breath, so that Clara wouldn't hear. They pulled into the parking lot near Robert's work. His car was already there. It was going to be a long ambush, Slava promptly ran to the nearest stall for coffee and buns. It took until lunchtime to doze off in the car. Slava nudged Camille in the shoulder as Robert came out of the agency together with the red-haired girl from the photo. They got into the car and got ready to drive out. "Let's go, lovebirds. We'll get them now," Clara muttered excitedly, twisting the steering wheel. Camille watched her husband's car with bated breath. She recognized the girl from the photo. Robert had said it was his assistant, but was it just that? The answer to that question loomed somewhere on the horizon. The editor and her companion made a trip to the city utility office and the stationery store. On the whole, there were no provocative moments except for the opening of the door. The girl carried a folder with documents, sometimes asking Robert something or answering the phone. He himself almost never took his eyes off the phone, even while driving. "Yeah, does he hold the door for you?" Clara was smarting when she noticed a gesture of kindness from her friend's husband. "Almost always," Camille answered, following Robert with her eyes. "Listen, call him right now," suggested Clara. "Ask him what he's doing and see what he says." Camille dialed the number and waited. Robert's phone was busy, but he switched calls almost immediately and picked up. "Hi, did you pick up lunch?" She answered his reply. "No, I'll grab a bite in the cafeteria. Don't worry." In a completely calm voice, the husband replied. "All right," Camille sighed. "How was your day?" "I've been traveling for work." That was the answer. "Why are you calling?" "No reason." Camille sensed that her husband suspected something. "See you tonight, bye." Clara listened to the conversation with her arms folded across her chest. He didn't say he was traveling with a woman. She played with her eyebrows expressively. Hiding for sure. Her wooden confidence pierced the last shield of doubt in Camille's chest. Why the hell did he even need an assistant? Clara clasped her hands together. Somehow he'd been working on his own for 2 years and nothing. And now what? Suddenly the manager's ambition has taken over. "I don't know." Camille was staring out the window. "Tired, I guess." "Yeah, from work or your wife?" Clara snorted. "Let's go home. Do you drink white or red?" In the evening, Robert found 2 drunken girlfriends at home. Camille couldn't get Clara out for about an hour. She'd ask for a drink, she'd cuddle, she'd lose something in her bag. Finally, William arrived and took his exuberant wife himself. He cast a glance of interest and questioning glance at Camille, and they left. Now her husband seemed to Camille the best and most innocent. She fell dreamily asleep, hugging her pillow and whispering something to it with only her lips. Robert sat in the chair and waited for his spouse to fall asleep. He did not scold her, did not lecture her. He only set the alarm clock, put a couple of fizzy pills on the table, and put a glass of water on the table. Then he went out, hesitating on the threshold of the room as if in doubt. But the second confusion lasted only a moment. The man glanced at Camille, nodded to himself, and closed the bedroom door. Camille became nervous and jumpy. She began to be late for work, snapped at a patient who had traveled to her from across town for the first time. "Camille, why don't you take a vacation?" The receptionist at the desk asked sympathetically. "Maybe I will," replied the doctor, wrinkling her forehead tensely. She began to notice a cooling in her and Robert's relationship. Then he hugged her dryly, then forgot some usual little things, then dropped calls and called back himself. Camille remembered the way the other female students looked at him during their studies. Robert had always stood out. He was passionate, charismatic, had a great sense of humor and a sharp mind. Next to him, but felt sometimes that she did not reach. Over the years, Robert has not lost any of its appeal, even became even brighter. You have a salary today. Go to the mall. Buy yourself something. A dress, shoes. The mood will improve. Camille, my colleague, advised me sympathetically. It was a good idea. She had almost forgotten that it was the height of summer and that she didn't have to be self-conscious about jeans and simple t-shirts. Camille called Clara and suggested that they go shopping together after work, but her friend said she was busy and refused. At the mall, the windows were full of sales posters. Mannequins towered between the rows of clothes. Camille remembered what pants and styles of dresses she had been advised by Clara the day before and began to walk along the racks. After choosing a few options, she went to the fitting room. What a pleasant surprise! She heard behind her back when she came out to evaluate the outfit in the big mirror in front of the booths. Camille turned around and saw William. The man had come to the mall, apparently for the same reason she had, to update his closet. What a surprise! Camille muttered. Hello, William. The dress fits perfectly. The boy gave her a thumbs up. Don't hesitate to take it. This time he was fresh and had a positive attitude. The old memories that had come alive with his appearance slid unpleasantly down her back. Camille, I wanted to apologize. William began, shyly putting his hands behind his head. I got drunk in that cafe out of nerves and fatigue. I was talking nonsense. I'm sorry. I acted like a total asshole. Camille was surprised, pleasantly surprised. Good, it happens. What are you doing here? She glanced around the store, as if confirming the question. I closed a nerve-wracking deal at work, took a breather, and out of the bonus, decided to buy myself a long-time dream. William nodded at the package from the appliance store, and the new jeans were a bonus. Camille looked at the jeans appraisingly. You take them too. Don't think twice. She smiled slightly. Even the sudden company in William's face was good for her for some reason. Maybe it distracted her from her obsessive thoughts. Maybe she needed a counselor, or maybe it was something else. Clara was busy working, and she wouldn't come with me. He said, as they left the store with their purchases. Me too, busy for the day. Camille confirmed. How about a coffee? William suggested. Or was there something else you wanted to buy? Camille thought that the lingerie shopping would have to be postponed and nodded in agreement, approving the coffee idea. At the cafeteria cash register, she wanted to pay for it herself, but William was the first to do so and put a flavored drink and a small dessert in front of her. Camille hadn't ordered the latter. Come on, as the husband of your best friend. William waved his hand. We're almost related. Before he could say anything, he heard a text message from the bank. Why? William stared sorely at Camille, looking at the balance of the card. Almost, but not related. The girl commented briefly. They chatted, then went back down to the shopping floors and wandered for a long time, picking out one pretty thing or another. Camille sensed that William was enjoying himself with her. He didn't turn on that whiner in the cafe anymore, but was cheerful and somehow relaxed, at the same time talking about all sorts of funny situations at work, reminiscing about old friends and years of study. There was even room for a story about William's country childhood and the fun vacations of a first grader. Listening to all this, Camille did the main thing, distracted herself from obsessive thoughts about her husband's love. It was time to get home. The time was nearing evening. Camille hailed a cab as they stood at the entrance to the mall. Thanks for the shopping trip. Camille smiled as the car pulled up. Thank you for the pleasant walk. Maybe we can do it again sometime. William opened the door of the cab for her. It's probably not the right thing to do. Camille hesitated. William gave her a quick peck on the cheek and said, Well, you're a big girl. It's time to prioritize what's right. Camille drove home dazed and outraged and flattered. She was a mixture of all the emotions of the last few days. Resentment toward her husband, worry about their private life, irritation, and into all of it sprinkled sparks of innuendo from William. It's not right. It's not nice that she's having coffee with her husband, her best friend's best friend, who is the second time he's made ambiguous hints to her. Why? Well, of course she knows why. She knows she loves Robert. She knows she values Clara as a friend and loved one. And she knows she's not ready to go along with what William is veiledly offering her. Everything is obvious and simple. But then why is she flattered by his attention? Is it not compensation for a grudge from Robert? How long had it been since he'd spent with her? Almost half of his day off. The more Camille thought about it, the more the questions became, leading her into the wilderness or to an unpleasant crossroads. Tomorrow I'd talk to Robert straight, Camille decided, and tell Clara the truth about her husband. That would be the right prioritization. The next day, Camille had few patients, so she got off early after work. On the way, she received a call from a nervous Robert, who asked her to bring her work phone, which she had forgotten at home. On the way, she thought about the best words to say to her friend and her husband. She decided to start with the first one. She dialed Clara's number and proposed to meet in the evening. The makeup artist happily said in the phone about her agreement and even asked if it was worth dressing up. No, we'll just sit around, followed by a reply. Entering the apartment, Camille heard the trills of Robert's work phone. She picked it up from the mirror in the hallway and glanced at the screen. There were about 10 missed calls, and she was about to get into a cab when a message sent at about 1 o'clock in the morning caught her eye. Missed you, my affectionate boss. Looking forward to tomorrow. Camille felt like she'd been splashed with cold water. Here it is. Her suspicions, here in her hands on her husband's phone screen. Tears came to her eyes. Her nose pinched and her throat was filled with rage and jealousy. Camille caught her own gaze in the rearview mirror and was stunned. She was looking at an angry and deceived woman, hungry for revenge and justice. All plans to talk to her husband were forgotten in a moment. Warden, then, Camille hissed, clutching the phone so that it almost cracked. The cab driver involuntarily glanced at the passenger. He sensed with his spinal cord that something wrong was going on behind him. The only thing the girl managed to do before jealousy finally drowned her in its cauldron was to write down the number from which the text message had been sent. Camille burst into the agency office with flaming cheeks. The staff said hello to her, but the girl didn't hear. She yanked Robert's office door open to the astonished stares, but it wouldn't budge. Robert's at lunch. A fellow journalism intern shyly spoke up, emerging from the right. He was the first to catch Camille's furious gaze. We'll wait for him here. Camille glanced angrily at the empty chair of the assistant next to the office and sat down in her chair, tapping her fingers on the tabletop expectantly. The whole office stared at her, with a mixture of fear and bewilderment. Someone had apparently called Robert on the sly, and he came rushing in a couple minutes later. Did you have a good meal, sweetheart? Camille got up from her chair and angrily shoved his nose, the phone screen texting. At the same time, she glared angrily at Kelly, who was standing in the doorway behind the chief with a stack of papers. Camille? The girl felt that her claims were being ignored, that everyone was laughing at her in a voice that was not embarrassed. Why? Why did it say the word supervisor? She threw it at Robert's back, grabbing the doorknob. I have no idea. As if there weren't enough bosses in town. Without turning around, Robert replied, Camille stepped out of her husband's office, and a dozen prying eyes stared at her. She walked briskly down the hallway without looking at anyone, and on her way out of the building she saw Kelly standing by the parking lot. She was being hugged and apparently comforted by some guy. Camille froze for a moment, and then shame came over her in a wave that burned her from the inside out. Tears held back, hers for so long, tore down the barrier and dripped from her eyes. Nothing. Clara counted the drops of valerian. Men, they are so dodgy, cunning, but you don't need to cry over it. Appreciate your dignity. She handed Camille, who was shaking, a glass of water and a sedative. Clara came as soon as she heard her friend's unintelligible voice mixed with crying. "Clara, I've embarrassed him." The girl took the glass with a shaking hand. "And him and me. I'm anticipating a story on their website. The editor's crazy wife bursts into the office. God, what a shame." Camille was in tears again. She hadn't been able to calm down for about an hour. "Well," Clara sighed, "at least you'll be remembered. And why would you go there in the first place?" "I'm such an idiot." Camille bumped into her friend's shoulder. "We're all a bit stupid." Clara gently put her palm on her head. "Why did you call me this afternoon?" Camille realized that she couldn't handle another confrontation today. "I just wanted to chat," she answered. "Maybe do some shopping." "Well, we're not going anywhere now. No amount of foundation can hide your puffy eyes. That's what I'm telling you as an expert." Clara made a finger to the ceiling, which made her friend smile a little. "What are you going to do about Robert? I don't believe in random texting." "I don't know. Maybe I'm just really paranoid." Camille slumped against the back of the couch and stared at the ceiling. "If that's the case, you should apologize. I'd do some more digging." Clara wouldn't let it go. It was reckless of him to sleep with his almost secretary. It's like a joke situation. There's someone else, that's for sure. "I'll talk to him if I can." Camille exhaled. For some reason she dialed the number she had copied from her husband's cell phone. Once again, it responded with the monotonous muttering of an electronic robot. Robert came home late that evening, but Camille waited for him. Her husband looked at her glumly and without a word went to take a shower. "Robert, I'm sorry." Camille waited for him in the room. The man walked past her and shook his head. "I'll forgive you, but my reputation is ruined by your tantrum today. There will be whispers behind my back, and I gave Kelly the day off." "I was wrong." Camille stared sorrowfully at the floor. "I'm so embarrassed. I was so ashamed." Robert sat down on the other side of the sofa. "You've turned into some kind of paranoid neurotic, haven't you? Going through my things, sniffing my hair, then doing this because of some stupid mistake. Some strange woman. God damn it." "I just felt like our relationship was getting colder." Quietly, Camille muttered. "When it seems, my dear, it is customary to be baptized," said Robert. "Have you decided to play the jealous wife?" The idea failed, but Clara said, "The beginning was Camille. You and Clara should be in the yellow ward together with ideas like that." Her husband came at her again. "Who does she listen to? She can't see what's under her nose, but they give you advice. She has a husband who walks left and right." Suddenly, Robert stopped halfway through the sentence. It looked as if he had said something unnecessary, and now he was trying to figure out how to put it back. Camille's ears perked up. "Shorter." The man pressed the bridge of his nose with his fingers and covered his eyes. "Take a sedative, and don't talk nonsense to Clara. She's a bad influence on you." Robert stood up and left the room, signaling that the conversation was over. Camille was left sitting alone in the dark, confused and full of doubts. Robert knows something about William, but he doesn't say anything. Is it male solidarity or what? And why is he suddenly so against Clara? Tormented Camille did not pay attention to the real coldness of her husband and his frank unwillingness to solve the problem and forgive her. A week passed. Life went on as usual. The head doctor of the clinic informed Camille that she, along with 2 other young dentists, would go to a 3-day conference in another city. The girl was even a little happy about this turn of events. It could help her take her mind off her worries, although outwardly no one would have found in Camille's life reasons to do so. Her husband was friendly to her. Clara still called and chattered like a magpie about everything. The patients didn't diminish, but behind the outer mask of normality, there was the affable coldness of her husband, a girlfriend drowned in rhinestones, and a job that suddenly became exhausting and drained all her energy. Camille could never find the strength to talk to her friend about her husband. She had no proof on her hands except her own words. No enough suspicions, she would have to get her family in order first. Robert agreed that the trip would be good for his wife and even bought her a train ticket. You'll listen to smart uncles and aunts, you'll go for a walk and put all the nonsense out of your head. He admonished Camille as she packed her traveling bag. The train was tapping its wheels. The girl rarely rode trains, and every time she did it was a bit of a gimmick. Colleagues were arguing animatedly nearby. Robert may be right. I'm being paranoid. He and I have been together since we were 18, and there has never been any occasion. Thought Camille, looking out the window at the passing station, Christmas trees. How many people preyed on him at university? I didn't really care at the time. Well, almost. Yes, it's all about panicking yourself and others. Whether it was the monotonous chug-chug that chased away the bad thoughts or the atmosphere of the trip, Camille was in a pleasant mood. She put her head down on the iron and freshly laundered linen. I'll come back and we'll definitely go to my grandmother's house in the country. Camille decided and closed her eyes. Training in the company of the sea and the sun really did the girl good. In the morning, she and her colleagues listened to seminars of experienced doctors and presentations of new materials for work, and in the afternoon, they went to the beach to sunbathe and swim. The sea climate and fresh air seemed to erase her worries from her mind. Camille thought about how she would return home, how she would tell Robert about the trip. How then the 2 of them would go to the place where malachite was mined and a friend was writing his collection of stories. It's a pity I don't have Clark with me. The girl thought, watching the waves. She said she hadn't been to the sea for a couple of years. Camille wanted very much to share her peace with people close to her. After all, the colleagues were only colleagues. On the 3rd day, the organizers said that the last speaker could not come due to illness. They apologized to the participants and informed them that the training was closed. Camille decided not to stay one more day in the hotel with the others, but bought a ticket on the same day and went home. I'm going to surprise Robert. I'll arrive early and with a tan. She smiled, looking out the window at the sea. The train arrived at its destination early in the morning. On the train, Camille had a nice chat with a neighbor and her grandson 9 years old. The grandmother treated the girl to fruit and enjoyed listening to her stories about her work, recalling her own youth. The mooring city was just waking up, washed by the night rain. It wasn't as warm here as it was by the sea. It was even a little fresh. Outside the cab window, sleepy alleys and early joggers whizzed by. In the alleys, the first rays of sunlight dispersed the foggy remnants. They played in puddles and glimmered drops on bushes and tree branches. The cab driver helped her unload her bag, wished her a good day, and drove off to his new passengers. Camille thought about how she would go up to the apartment, Go in quietly and lie down in bed with a sleeping Robert. How nice that today was her husband's day off and they would be able to sleep through lunch together, then make coffee and talk about the upcoming trip. Camille quietly turned the key in the lock so as not to wake Robert. Quietly, she entered the apartment and barely saw the familiar hallway, dazed. All the good mood she'd brought with her from the sea had collapsed and shattered into tiny pieces. Her heart was pounding like the wheels of the train she had come back here on. There were shoes lying in the hallway that she would recognize out of 100. They'd bought them together last year and picked up the last pair in town. The shoes belonged to Clara. At the mirror, Camille saw her keys and an equally achingly familiar car keychain. For a moment, a childish, naive thought crept into her head. Maybe something had happened, and Clara had come to ask for help. But the thought was immediately suffocated by the falling curtain of obviousness. From the bedroom, Camille heard soft voices. It seemed to her that her heart was pounding so that the neighbors could hear her. The girl crept quietly to the door and froze, listening to what was going on behind it. I almost talked him into totally buying me the parlor from Vanessa. A familiar female voice sounded. Will you get a divorce as soon as the official deal is done? The husband's voice answered him. On the same day, confirmed with a laugh the interlocutress. And when are you going to file the papers? I'm thinking of what to tell her. A sigh followed. The idea of a fake affair had failed. Failed because someone forgot their cell phone at home. A woman's voice interrupted. I've been working her as hard as I can. A little more, and she would have filed for divorce herself. We would have gotten away with it. And now you have to either talk head on or think of something else. It's a shame to go head on. Followed the answer after a short pause. I don't like her as a woman, but I pity her as a person. And the show is not pitiful. A female voice smirked. I choose the lesser of two zones. The male voice grinned. Camille clamped her hands over her mouth and felt the corners of her eyes grow wet. A wave of cold rushed up her back, her cheeks felt hot, and her throat felt like it was being squeezed in the grip of an invisible hand. The realization fell in pieces, and each one was worse than the last. It stung, eating away at everything good inside, like acid. Robert, you and I tried it back in college, but you were too right then, and I was too stupid. But if it had worked then, Clara's voice was quiet, but creeping. There might not have been those long years, with the bore and the dentist. My husband might not be here, and things would be easier now, and we'd be living somewhere abroad by now. If everything works out, that's what will happen. Robert confirmed. We'll manage remotely, you the salon and me the agency. Camille felt the tears soaking her shirt and imprinting hot drops on her chest. We'll be gone, and maybe they'll get something with William. A chuckle came from behind the door. I could see him looking at her. Good for Camille. She likes dumplings and soup and watching soap operas at night. She's always been a little short of you. She loves her work and doesn't like herself very much, said Robert. We live like neighbors. I'm tired of the home girl who always has everything according to plan. I feel like an old man. Next to her, I want something else. I know what you want, Robert, she whispered. Further in the room, there was a commotion. Camille sat against the wall outside the door, shaking with shame, pity, disgust, resentment, and betrayal of the two people she thought closest to her after her mother. The last bit of realization poured out. The cup had emptied. The cold hands of reality finally closed around her throat. She jumped up and flung herself out of the apartment in what she was wearing. The street morning, Camille ran and ran, away from the shame and embarrassment she had lived in for so many years. She was disgusted with her own existence. She wanted to forget herself, to erase her memory. She wanted to go back 10 years, to pull her hand out of Clara's fingers, to send the smug asshole in the dormitory. Each year that passed was like whipping her in the back with a rod, leaving deep wounds and setting up the pain to roll in harder and harder. Tears covered her eyes. Everything was cloudy, barely recognizable. She stopped, breathed, and ran again. Passers-by shouted at her, but Camille did not hear, did not see. She wanted to hide from this vile feeling from herself. Girl, look out! It was the last shred of reality that imprinted itself on her memory before pain and darkness overrode her. The peaceful sounds of play snapped Camille out of oblivion. She was still thinking irritably what that nasty beeping sound was, similar to the trills of an electronic alarm clock from the 90s. My eyes opened with difficulty. My body felt woozy. My right leg felt petrified and wouldn't move. My whole right side gave a painful tightening sensation when I tried to turn on the bed. My head was buzzing. "Good morning. You're finally awake, Camille." A woman in a white coat greeted her. Camille looked around and only then realized that she was lying in a hospital bed. What happened to me? She looked at the leg in a cast that was sticking out from under the blanket. "You were hit by a car. I'm surprised you got away with a broken leg, a mild concussion, and moderate contusions." The doctor replied, looking at the paperwork. "They pick up other people in pieces in cases like this. You were born with your shirt on. Your family will be happy to know that you're on the mend." "Not all of them." Camille turned her back to the wall. "Is someone coming to see you?" "To call your relatives?" The doctor asked. "Tell my husband I've been hit by a car and I'm dead. I can't go back. I don't want to see him again, and I don't want to see her ever again." Pleadingly, Camille said without turning around. The doctor shook her head. "If they come, don't let them in," Camille added. The hospital was dreary, but the walls with the Red Cross seemed to shield her from the painful thoughts of what had happened. The physical pain didn't bother her as much as her soul was tearing up. The mother rushed to the hospital half an hour after the call. She first cringed, then cursed, then cried at her daughter's bedside. Camille told her everything she had heard that morning. When Miranda left her daughter's room, she gave the nurses each a box of chocolates, and on pain of complaining to the head doctor, ordered that no one with names beginning with the letters R and C be allowed to see her daughter. Camille blocked the numbers of the husband and the lying friend. She asked her mother and a coworker friend to pick up her belongings from her husband's apartment when he was away. Doctors said rehabilitation would take about 3 weeks. The fracture would finally heal in 3 months. One day there was a knock on the door of the room. Camille thought it was one of the staff, although they usually didn't bother to knock. "Come in," she shouted, not looking away from the magazine her mother had brought. "Hello, Camille." There was a familiar voice. William stood in the doorway with a bouquet of flowers and a robe thrown over his shoulders. Camille had mixed feelings when she saw her ex-girlfriend's husband. On the one hand, he reminded her of what had happened, but on the other hand, he had nothing to do with it. "You have no idea how hard I worked to get here," the man complained, sitting down on the edge of the bed. "They're practically checking IDs to get in to see you." "That's my request." Camille nodded. "Why, are you hiding from someone?" William joked. "Maybe I am," the girl confirmed. William stared at her in surprise. His eyes were filled with question and incomprehension. Camille exhaled and decided to tell. She recalled everything: Clara's partying at the Institute, her consumerist attitude toward men, and her hypocrisy under the mask of a friend. William listened with his mouth open. I want you not to fall victim to their game like I did. Get a divorce soon and don't listen to any pleas. Don't you dare buy a salon. Clara is using you and has been using you." Camille finished. "Where did you?" The stunned William couldn't believe his ears. They talked about it for a long time. The girl asked the man not to tell anyone where she was or what was wrong with her, and not to do anything stupid that would ruin his life. At the end, when William was leaving, he asked, "Camille, tell me, do I have a chance?" "Not at the moment." She shook her head. "I want to be alone. Maybe in the future, maybe. I understand, correct me soon. I'll come by, if you don't mind." Nodded William. "Come over." She blinked, showing agreement. Time passes differently in the village than in the city. It is measured and quiet. Hustle and hurry are alien to those who are accustomed to get up to the trill of the rooster. A light frost touched the rowan berries, which shone against the snow with bright lights. The snow itself sparkled in the sunlight, still fresh, not crushed by anyone's feet and paws. "Granddaughter, there's a letter for you." Kathy grunted, entering the hay and waving the envelopes. "Thank you." Camille shouted from the kitchen. She was preparing a simple breakfast for herself and her grandmother. "It's been a long time since I've seen a letter." Sitting down on a stool, Kathy exclaimed, "You young people are all calling now. Is there a letter from some fiancé?" She handed Camille an envelope. She took a quick glance at the sender's name and decided to read it later. After her recovery, Camille immediately went to her grandmother's house in the country. She could not stay in the city, where every street reminded her of the experience, betrayal, and shame. The girl quit her job, took care of other minor matters, made her mother her representative in the divorce proceedings so she wouldn't have to deal with Robert anymore. "Out of sight, out of mind," said her mother as she saw her off. "You can go as you like and come back as you like. Just call me often." It was quiet in the village, where the pain began to subside and gradually recede. Time was doing its work, healing the wounded soul. Mother did not talk about Robert and the divorce, only promised to tell me when it was completely over. The envelope had an address and William's name on it. How did he know where to find her? It remained a mystery. Camille ran her eyes over the lines. William had written about the divorce, about leaving Clara with almost nothing. She deliberately skipped that part of the letter. "Dear Camille, I realize that I'm probably an unnecessary person in your life, but since that evening in the cafe, you haven't left my mind. I've made a lot of mistakes and missed a lot of chances, but I don't want to let you go." The girl stopped, listening to herself. Something faintly trembled in her after these words. "I'm willing to wait as long as you say. I hope for an answer. William." Camille folded the letter, tucked it into the envelope, and began to twirl it in her hands. If she had doubted it at the hospital, now she knew for sure. Kathy came into the room. "What do you think I should write back?" asked the old woman, looking at the concentrated face of her granddaughter. "I think that old fans are not invited into the new life." Camille smiled at her grandmother, tearing open the envelope. She tossed the scraps into the trash can and looked out the window. "Grandma, the neighbor's here, probably to ask about the cow again. She's so restless. She'll cure the animal." The old woman shook her hands and trampled in the hay.
Subscribe and click the bell.
James, sitting in the stuffy car, gazed out the window with admiration past passing floating landscapes were painfully native. The fields of the forest he had dreamed of, doing time in places not so remote. His desire was to ask the driver to stop, run out of the bus, throw off his shoes and barefoot, walk on the grass right across the field, and then fall to the ground, look at the blue sky and listen to the whispering leaves, and breathe deeply, breathing, inhaling with his whole chest this fresh, clean air. The 3 years that the court had sentenced the boy to seemed endless. Very often he dreamed of his yard birch with raindrops on the leaves. And what is most interesting, in none of his dreams, he never once saw the one for whom he found himself in such a sad place. And who was she? One of the fleeting girls he'd been clubbing with, a wastrel. And judging by her provocative outfits and behavior, she knew it herself. As a result, nothing good. Of course, it did not end. When James, at her friend's request, went away from her to the bar to get a new portion of alcohol, she was accosted by drunken guys. James, not thinking long, returned and a fight ensued. The guy badly remembered who pushed whom, who hit whom first. Everything happened too fast. One of the attackers fell and never got up again. As it turned out later, the fall was unfortunate. The young man had hit a concrete step with his paddle. Did James regret what he'd done? Yes, of course he did. The first time he was behind bars, every night before he went to bed, he replayed the events of that terrible evening. Only now he realized that it could have been resolved verbally. It wasn't necessary to use his fists. And then the fate of all the people would have been different, and the murdered man would still be alive. But he understood that now, what's done is done, and there was no going back. That girl that James got into a fight over. Of course she wasn't going to wait for him. In fact, no one was counting on it. There was nothing serious between them. Did he think she was to blame for what happened? No, he didn't. He had only himself to blame. James sighed heavily. On the other hand, those 3 years were behind him, and now he had a wonderful life ahead of him. Now, of course, he wouldn't get into any more trouble. He's going home. It was very stuffy on the bus. He looked around and noticed that not a single window was open. Then he turned to the girl sitting next to him. "Excuse me, would you mind if I opened the window?" "Yes, of course. Open it a little," the neighbor replied. James immediately reached up and pulled the window sashes down, then looked at the girl again carefully. Pretty flashed through his mind. Only for some reason very sad, almost crying. You can see it in her eyes. "Did something happen to you?" James asked cautiously. "No, nothing's wrong." "Why would you say that?" "Well, because your eyes are wet and it shows." "No, really, I'm fine," she insisted, though her shaky voice gave her away. James wanted to distract her from her sad thoughts, and without expecting it, he blurted out, "I'm going home. 3 years in prison. And today I'm out. You have no idea how happy I am. If I could, I'd hug the whole world." She, interested, looked at the guy, but at the same time cautiously in pity all the money, as if distancing herself from him. "Don't worry," laughed James. "I'm not a maniac. You have nothing to fear. It's just that 3 years ago, I got into a drunken brawl, and a man died because of me. But believe me, I didn't mean it. You see, I've told you everything to the letter. Now it's your turn. What happened to you, anyway? My name's James, by the way. What's yours?" "I'm Kathy, but I have a husband, and I'm not dating anyone or anything." "Well, I'm not claiming anything. I just wanted to chat, to pass the time on the road." The guy smiled. "You have no idea how nice it is to talk to a regular person. Besides, if I'm not mistaken, we're countrymen." "That's right. The terminus is in my hometown. You're from there too." "Yes," Kathy nodded. She looked more closely at her companion. He was a good-looking guy with a good-natured face, and for a moment she thought she'd seen him somewhere before. Could be. It was a small town, and given that they were the same age, they'd probably crossed paths somewhere. And James didn't look like a criminal to me. If he hadn't admitted it himself, Kathy wouldn't have thought of it. Maybe he really just wanted to socialize after such a difficult time in his life. "All right," she replied. "Can we talk about something? How old are you?" "Just turned 25. But where I've been, they don't celebrate birthdays." That's what Kathy thought. And I was right. We're the same age as them. So you be 22. It was very scary, James exclaimed. I was terrified. But to be honest, at the time, prison time didn't scare me. It was the thought of taking a man's life that terrified me. It took me a very long time to get used to and come to terms with that thought. James was surprised at how easy it was for him to communicate with his new acquaintance. He felt that she understood him like no one else. There was something about the painting that made James feel at ease. They drove the rest of the way over the friendly conversation, and James didn't notice the bus pulling into his hometown and stopping at the bus station. He looked around in confusion. Kathy waved goodbye and disappeared around the corner. It had to be admitted that not much had changed in the time he'd been gone. Even the cab stand was in the same place. Not thinking long, James went in the direction of the cars. It would be a 10-minute drive to his home, and he would finally get to see his father and hug him. In the 3 years he'd been in prison, neither his father nor his brother had written him a single letter. Hate letters. But he didn't resent them. He understood everything. His father was sick before he went to prison. He'd forgotten a lot of things, confused his sons, and Nick wasn't initially thrilled that his brother was a felon. James, I really wanted to believe that his father's health hadn't deteriorated in those 3 years. His dad had been a successful businessman for a long time, had a huge auto parts store in the center of town, and several volumes of business, because there wasn't much competition. Even before James' men's imprisonment, he tried to pass the management to his sons. James had done better than his older brother, and he really hoped that during his absence, Nick hadn't let the store go to waste. When the cab parked in a private lot near the family home, James was speechless at what he saw. A second floor had been added to the house. It wasn't even a house anymore. It was a palace. Well done, Dad. The boy smiled. So things were still going so well. And how did you organize the territory? New gates have been installed. Now you can see at once that wealthy people live here. They had long ago told his father that they should have done so, but the man did not want to stand out. In front of the neighbors, Nick managed to talk him into it. Pulled the gate. James realized it was locked. He pressed the bell a couple times and waited. But no one was in a hurry to open it for him. Suddenly, a small box next to the bell rang, and from it came his brother's disgruntled voice. Who? Nick. Hello from the Sparrow. Your brother's back. A few minutes later, James looked at his brother and couldn't say a word out of shock. He hadn't even noticed the travel bag sinking from his shoulder and falling to the concrete. Died when? Why didn't he tell me anything? I had a right to know. Would it have made a difference? Nick snapped at me. Maybe they let you out of jail for the funeral. James squatted down and wrapped his arms around his knees. Dad, how come? Why didn't you wait for me? Why did he die? James asked his brother. A heart attack. Apparently, his heart couldn't handle the embarrassment of being the son of a criminal. Don't tell me, James muttered. Where's he buried? I'm going to go see him now. Yeah, right now. The boy got up and grabbed his bag from the floor. I'll just throw my things in my room. Where are you going to throw them? His brother asked indignantly. This isn't your room anymore. The house has been remodeled, in case you hadn't noticed, and your father's death isn't all sad news for you. Before he died, as if he had a premonition, he made a will. Everything belongs to me now, the stores and the house. So I'm sorry, little brother. Nick spread his hands. Now do you see why your room isn't here? The house is mine. James' heart was tearing apart. Not from being disinherited, but from the thought that he'd disappointed his father so much, just doing it that way. Right after he was arrested, his dad came to see him. The man was completely sane. Apparently, he'd had one of his moments of enlightenment. The last time they met, Dad said, Son, there's a law for doing things, and I'm not gonna drag you out of here. I realize you didn't do it on purpose, but you killed a man and you must be punished for it, so you can feel the weight of what you've done. But remember, no matter what, you're my son, and I love you very much. If they let me, I will definitely come to visit you in prison. I will be very much looking forward to your release." These words did not come as a surprise to James. He had always known that his father was a fair and honest man, but despite the fact that James was the favorite in the family, and this was noticed by many people, he would never help him in such a situation. The character wasn't right, and James did not understand why his father did not come to see him. The guy decided that his health did not allow, and the reason turned out to be something else entirely. "Fine, let the house be yours, if that makes you feel better," James muttered. "But can you take me in for a while? I'll need a corner until I can get a place to live." Nick pointed to an inconspicuous door under the stairs. "That's where I put all your stuff. But I'm telling you, you've got a month to do everything. If you don't find a place to live and get a job during that time, you'll go to live on the street, and I'm not going to babysit you." That's quite a month. I didn't expect that kind of generosity. James grinned. "A month is a month. Tell me where Dad's buried." Suddenly, the front door opened and Kathy, the one James had met a few hours earlier, walked in. "No show, no sharing at last," Nick shouted. "We agreed you'd go one day. But I called and warned you that I couldn't get the documents so quickly," she mumbled, not taking her eyes off James. "Yeah, is that my problem or what? Who do you think should watch the kid all this time? You'd think I'd have nothing to do. Good mom left her kid for almost 24 hours and doesn't give a shit." Nick noticed that his wife was keeping an eye on his brother. "Yes, by the way, this is my brother released from a place not so remote. But don't worry, he won't be here long." How he got free, Kathy wondered. "But you told me." "Nobody cares what I told you. He's here, period." Nick interrupted her. Kathy looked at James in such a belittling way that he immediately understood. No need to mention that they knew each other. Nick might see it that way. Isis smiled tiredly at James. "Honestly, I don't know what to call you, but it's definitely nice to meet you. Well, I gotta go. I wanted to visit my father." James went to the room Nick had given him. It had been a closet, but now all of James's things had been thrown in there. There was only a couch and a small platinum cabinet where his things hung. It should be noted that before his imprisonment, James had spared no money for clothes, and now he was glad that his brother had kept it all and not given it away to the homeless out of spite. James set his bag by the door and sank down on the sofa by the table. It was hard to accept the loss of his father because he had been in such a hurry to see him. "Oh, Nick, why didn't you tell me?" He could hear the swearing between his brother and his wife. Though it was hardly swearing either, it was mostly Nick. Kathy was trying to justify herself. "I told you to go watch the baby. Mother talk. I gotta go run some errands." And a couple seconds later, James heard the front door slam loudly. Kathy climbed the stairs to the second floor, to the baby. "So Nick has a son, and I have a nephew," pondered James. "It's only been 3 years. How much had changed?" James changed his clothes and was about to leave, but realized that Nick hadn't told him where his father was buried. Then the guy left the room and went up to the second floor. Not knowing which door to enter, he shouted loudly, "Kathy, where are you?" "I am here invited," Anna replied. James entered the room and immediately realized that it was the nursery. The surroundings spoke for themselves. When he saw the baby Kathy was holding, he gasped in surprise. He looked so much like his late grandfather. "Hello, tribe." James smiled, keeping a surprised look on the boy's face. "And what is your name?" "Kevin," answered Kathy. "And we recently turned a year old." "James, I wanted to thank you and ask you to keep our acquaintance a secret. Nick would be very unhappy if he found out." "Yeah, I get it. I get it," the guy said. "Of course I won't. Can I support my nephew? Has anyone ever told you he looks like our dad?" "A lot." "Yes," Nick said. "At the time of your dad's death, we were just dating, so I hadn't really seen him." "Nick, I didn't tell you much, and to be honest, I didn't see you that way." He made it sound like you were a bloodthirsty killer with a lot of time to sit around. So when we talked on the bus, it didn't occur to me that you were my husband's brother. Although, looking at your face, I knew you definitely reminded me of someone. I'm sorry, but I always say what I think." Kathy was making excuses again. But James didn't hear her. He was preoccupied with his nephew. Then the girl explained where their father was buried. And coming to the cemetery, James sat at the grave for a very long time, almost 3 hours whispering the same phrase. "I'm sorry, Dad, I'm sorry." He got home late. Nick would rather have gone to bed already. So when his disgruntled brother opened the gate for him, he immediately shoved a set of keys into his hands. "It won't take long," he muttered. "And don't take too long to find a job." In the morning, James decided that he would go straight to look for a job, but he didn't even notice how his feet brought him to a familiar store. This is where he spent his childhood and youth, helping his father. Of course, today the store looked very different from what it had been in his father's time. It used to be a small building, but now it was a huge one-story building with glass windows, a huge sign with a ticker, and an inflatable figure next to it called out "Shopper" appealingly. The store's staff had changed completely. James didn't recognize anyone, but the guy didn't give up hope of finding one person. And here a smile lit up his face. "Stephen, James, you're back," sincerely rejoiced an elderly man. He came up to the boy and hugged him tightly. "Oh, James, James, I couldn't wait for you, Father." Stephen was an old friend of James's father. As soon as the store started to grow and the need for extra hands arose, Stephen was the first to be hired. "Let's go," the man nodded. "Toward the back. We'll have a chat. Tell me about your misadventures." "Yes, tell me about your misadventures." "You don't have much to tell," James replied. As soon as they crossed the threshold of the back room, "Stephen, is it true that my father died for me? That I am already weak of heart? I couldn't take the shame. Nick told me so." "What are you talking about? It never occurred to me to shame you. Everybody can make mistakes. We talked to him about your situation many times, and he kept saying, if he did something wrong, let him serve his sentence. When he's released, I'll take him straight to work. And when he found out about the will, I was very surprised. I don't know why he signed it over to Nick, though he was a little slow on the uptake then." James. The disease progressed. After a while, Stephen glanced at his watch. "Hurry up," James clarified. "Nick is a very strict boss," he replied. "We now have a system of fines, including for absenteeism. You'd better come to me in the evening. We'll have a quiet cup of tea and chat." "Okay," smiled the guy. "I also basically have to go. I still need to look for a job." "What's there to look for?" "Your brother needs a driver. Who knows the specifics of the job better than you? We still have the same suppliers, and you know them well. I think this is the right place for you." Suddenly, the door to the back room opened, and Nick walked in with a wide, heavy stride. "Stephen, how long are you going to be out of work? What do you want here?" Nick looked at his brother unhappily. "Yeah, I found out you're looking for a driver. Come to get a job. You'll take it." "Of course not. I already have a suitable candidate." "Nick, don't anger God by not turning your brother down. You couldn't find a better man for the job." Standing up for James, Stephen. Nick frowned even more and through his teeth muttered, "All right, I'll take it. But I'm warning you, James. Don't poke your nose into the store management. You're just the driver now. Don't forget that." "Not the factories. I won't forget," grinned my brother. "I can get to work right now. Just show me my transportation. And where do I get the accompanying documents?" James worked diligently, as promised, and tried not to get involved in the store. However, when he realized how his brother was doing business, he came to the conclusion that the store was heading for big losses. The first thing James noticed was the overpricing. By doing so, Nick was turning away many regular customers. And here you do not have to be very smart to realize that the store does not bring in the same percentage of profit. But those weren't the only mistakes, and all of this James could bring to his brother's attention. He was well aware that no one would listen to him and would only freak out. Nick was already walking into eternity with a disgruntled face. Returning in the evenings from work, James cooked his own dinner because he was immediately labeled the position here is not catering, and no one has neither time nor desire to cook for you. So you're on your own. Sometimes in the room, James found a container with food. This Kalina secretly left it from her husband. But in general, the atmosphere in this family was certainly unhealthy. The very first minutes of being here, James realized that Nick treated Kathy like property. He was a real tyrant husband. His brother's wife was never seen or heard from. She moved around the house like a shadow. The son mostly didn't cry in his father's presence either. But if he did, Nick screamed like a madman. How many times have I told you to watch the baby better? How much of a neglectful mother are you? It never ceases to amaze me. In my own house, no peace. From time to time, Nick didn't sleep at home. On such days, he would call to warn me about a business trip that he needed to get out of town right away. Kathy and James loved such evenings because they could talk until late at night. They were very easy together. They chatted about everything but one thing. The woman didn't like the subject, but James still insisted. I really want to understand the reasons why you let yourself be treated this way. You're a smart, beautiful woman, and you deserve better. Can't you just put him in his place once? To make him realize he can't do that. Yeah, tell him you're gonna file for divorce eventually. You just don't understand. Kathy shook her head. I should probably go to bed. It's late. It was like this all the time. Eventually, she'd take her son and go back to her place. And one time, James had said something that made him want to punch himself in the mouth. It's a strange business trip for Nick, isn't it? I wonder where he goes. Yeah, nowhere, Kathy exclaimed. With his mistress, he doesn't even leave the city limits. And you are so calmly informing me about it. Stunned James. How long have you known about his mistress? Of course I knew about his mistress first, and I knew about that too. I'm not an idiot, but now I don't understand you. Why do you live with him? Explain. He's my brother, of course, but you're not a stranger. I can't bear to see you humiliated. Get up off your knees and show some character. Walk away from him and believe me, he'll come crawling back for you. When he sees you're not a spineless creature, he'll change his attitude. Has it never occurred to you yourself? It never crossed my mind. And what's more, I broke up with him. But you know what the point is. I raised my voice at the orphanage. Kathy. But then I stopped talking. That's it. Let's drop the subject. I'm going to bed. She left, and James was left sitting in the kitchen in bewilderment. What does this have to do with the orphanage? The guy thought, orphanages don't leave their husbands. Or is it so important to her material well-being that she is ready to put up with a boorish attitude and change? In all the time she's been living here, James has never once heard Nick speak calmly to Kathy. He was always yelling at her. It was late evening and James was already asleep, tired from the day's long haul of goods. But as sound asleep, he was awakened by some strange sound, like a fall. It was coming from the second floor. James sat up jerkily on the couch and listened. Yes, it was. Nick is yelling at Kathy again. Only this time it wasn't quite the usual. His wife's voice could be heard in addition to his brother's. Kathy's repeating it all over and over again. You can't make out the words. I think, judging by the intonation. Don't please. And then there was another thud like the one that had awakened James a moment ago. An alarming hunch struck the boy. He jumped to his feet and raced to the second floor. James opened the bedroom door without knocking, and his fears were confirmed. Nick swung around to hit Kathy again, and the girl, not even trying to get up off the floor, repeated not to. Nick, please. James rushed into the room and grabbed Nick's arm. Are you crazy? He yelled. Nick yanked his arm out and turned around to face James. I am crazy. Where are you sticking your nose in? We'll figure it out. This is our family business, and you've been taken in. Be happy. Nick that moment was unlike himself. His eyes narrowed, and the glimmers were of anger. Get out of our bedroom. No, James shook his head negatively. You have to promise not to lay a finger on your wife. What's her fault that she deserves to be treated this way? Well, if you're so interested, I picked up this pathetic orphanage from the street. She didn't even have a place to live. She managed to blow the apartment the state gave her. She went to a friend's house. I took her in. I dressed her. Abdul, she should kiss my feet. And she what? She can't take care of a child. The house is messy and dirty, but she's got plenty of time for tail wagging. Nick, what tail? Are you crazy? Your wife never leaves the house. She sits like a mouse. Yeah, but when she comes out with me, I see her staring at men. Just give her a free pass. I see you're obsessed with your thoughts, and it's useless to change your mind. But in any case, you have no right to hit her. It doesn't suit you. Divorce. And I'm telling you again, mind your own business. Go to your place. And don't worry. Don't touch her. Go to bed. What a bunch of protectors. Nick lay down on the bed, making it clear that he didn't want to talk anymore. James glanced at Kathy, who was rising from her knees, trying to cover herself. She was wearing a nightgown. The girl couldn't even look up at James. The boy realized she was uncomfortable and hurried out of the room. In the morning, James waited until Nikolaev slammed the door behind him, the front door, and the car goes out the gate, before leaving his room. Not finding Kathy on the first floor, he went to the second. The guy decided to talk to the girl by all means. Knocked. He entered without waiting for permission. She only had time to throw on her robe. Without asking anything, he walked quickly over to her and opened her robe with a jerk. Are you crazy? Shouted Kathy, trying to cover herself. Believe me, I'm not for the purpose of admiration, but my hunch was confirmed. James said grimly. Kathy's body was covered in bruises. Some were fresh. Some were already nudging. So he beats you so you can't see anything. Doesn't touch your face. Right? If I just didn't understand why you were around him before, now I'm stumped. Kathy, do you like this life, or is there some other reason? Where am I going? You've heard I'm an orphan. So, you talk like you're a leper. Surprised James. No, it's not just that. Kathy couldn't hold back her hysterics any longer and turned to screaming. You think I haven't tried leaving your brother? I rented an apartment and enjoyed my freedom and a quiet life. But he found me quickly, took my son, and told me I could go away. But he wouldn't give me my son. Kathy was sobbing, spilling out the bitterness and resentment that had long accumulated in her. I didn't see my son for a week. Every day I wandered around the house like a beaten dog, begging to be let in. And he reveled in the situation. When he finally let me in, he made it clear that if I wanted to divorce him, he would not prevent it. But his son would stay with him. He has a place to live, money, and most importantly, he has connections in the city administration. He opens some offices and doors with his foot. Whose side do you think so-called justice will be on? The situation is definitely not in my favor. An orphan with nothing, not even a job. James was silent when he suggested Kathy dump his brother. He didn't think much of his nephews. He thought he'd definitely stay with his mother. And here we are. Nick had certainly changed. He hadn't been so cruel before, though he was 5 years older than James, but they'd grown up together for years, and the younger man had never noticed such tendencies in his brother. But then James remembered his father's words. He told him that Nick should never be given power over people. He hadn't explained why he'd said that, but he must have noticed his eldest son's tendency to violence. That there was nothing to say interrupted his musings. Kathy, because I'm right. I have no way out. I guess it's fate. All right, James, I got to go feed my son. James never said anything. He went to work, didn't even eat breakfast. All day long, he couldn't get this situation out of his head. It can't go on like this. He had to find a way out of this. The guy still had a week to live in his brother's house. Then he would pay him the first paycheck and hope that James would immediately rent a place and move out. That was basically what James had planned to do. But now he will not live in rented accommodation and will offer his Kathy himself to stay somewhere. At least at Stephen's, the old man won't refuse. And then how to leave his nephew with his mother. You could, of course, tell the court how Nick beats and terrorizes his wife. But will they listen to his words? The words of an ex-con need convincing evidence. The first place to start is to record Kathy's beatings. That document would carry weight in the divorce. And Nick couldn't sleep. Half the night. He rolled over from side to side with Jenna sleeping sweetly beside him. Nick had been visiting her for a long time. He liked spending nights with her, but not much more. She was, so to speak, for the soul. At the beginning of their relationship, he made it clear to his mistress that he wouldn't leave his wife under any circumstances. Then the girl agreed, and now she was blowing her lips on his knee. That's all right. If she continues to be insolent, Nick will be able to put her in her place. In this, he has no equal. Today, Nick, as usual, called his wife and reported about the business trip, but now something was bothering him, and he understood perfectly well that it was his brother living in his house that was bothering him. They were getting too close to his wife. Nick didn't like it. Kathy. He was jealous of every pillar, but she never gave him cause for jealousy. Well, God forbid any man, but God forbid any man to fix his gaze on her. And Nicolay's blood boiled instantly, and at home he took his anger out on her. Tired of insomnia, he sat up in bed and lit the earpiece. "What are you doing up?" Jenna mumbled through her sleep. "I can't sleep. I'm going home. I'm restless." Like home. Jenna opened her eyes immediately. "You told your wife you were out of town, but it's okay. I'm back. I'll surprise you." "Oh, it's up to you," grumbled the disgruntled woman and rolled over to the other side. While Nick drove the car home, he had worked himself up into such a state that he was simply furious. Scenes of his wife and brother together kept popping up in his head. What could they possibly be doing? "You're staying at my house. Shouldn't have traveled yet." The house, he was greeted with peace and quiet. Nick didn't even turn on the lights. He flew to the second floor and opened the bedroom door. Right. How was he right? The bed was empty. Not even sprawled out. He immediately went downstairs and didn't knock. Swung open the door to James' room. Fire at hand, finding a light switch, he turned on the light. But James sat alone. Kathy wasn't here. Nick's heart eased a little. That it was morning. I'd overslept. James woke up, squinting against the bright light. "Kathy, no. In the bedroom. Where is she?" "So why are you asking me where your wife is?" "First of all, stop yelling. Maybe she's in the bathroom. The bed hasn't been assigned. She's not in the house. What did she say last night? Maybe she was going somewhere. I don't know. I didn't see her last night." Nick came home late, went straight to bed, and the house was quiet. And I thought she and her son had gone to bed. Kevin's right. It's not like I wasn't looking in the nursery. Nick ran up the stairs again. The sun had gone out of James's face, and he followed his brother. But it soon became clear that neither Kathy nor his son were in the house, and in addition their belongings were missing. Had she run away? Nick wondered. I don't get it. Life doesn't teach that fool anything. But she's not in prison to escape. James grinned. James grinned, hearing his brother's reasoning. She's just gone. And I think she did the right thing, by the way. I don't know how she lived with you as long as she did. And don't you dare threaten to take Kevin away from her. A child should live with its mother. If you try to take her son away from her, I'll testify against you and tell her you beat her systematically. The fact that I beat her will have to be proved. Nick grinned. And you're meddling again. You don't know anything at all, but you're just standing there being smart. Nobody's going to leave the baby to her, just like no one's gonna listen to you. She's the one who's all decent and modest now. But you have no idea what a fun life she led before we met. I told you she even blew off the house they gave her after the orphanage. Why am I surprising you? You don't have to answer that. I can see that. Kathy probably didn't tell you about it. Of course, she wouldn't have benefited from it. Now the question is, Whose side will this court be on when it comes to her son? And that fool won't repent. I'll develop faster with her myself. I'll take the kid and let her go." James looked at his brother as if he was seeing him for the first time. "Nick, you're seriously saying that now? Didn't you do some weird stuff when you were young? We're all sinful. I, for example, remember very well how your father took you away with the police, and clearly you weren't vacationing there. And Kathy is a normal person and a caring mother now. She doesn't drink and she doesn't go out. And she cares about her son. Leave him alone." No, Nick was stubborn. We got the whole town on edge. But he's still got that bitch. I'm gonna make her cry. The next day, Nick searched the city in the morning, using everyone he could find. But he couldn't find his wife. She had no friends, and only after 2 days of active search it turned out that she had bought a train ticket to Vladivostok. Nick checked and found out that the girl never reached the final station and got off the train somewhere earlier, but where is unknown. Only now the man realized that this time it was much more serious. Kathy skillfully covered her tracks so that he could never find her. The man returned home angry as hell. And when he saw a satisfied James in the kitchen, cooking dinner, he was even more furious. "I don't understand why you're still working here. You got your paycheck for the month. Well, let's get out of here. It's time to get an apartment." "Yes, I will, grinned the guy. "I'll do it tomorrow. I was just worried about the picture. But now I'm sure you won't be able to find it, so I can move out with a clear conscience." "Get out of here," hissed a furious Nick. "Get out of here. Right now, I told you." It didn't take James long to find a place to live. Stephen found out that it was time for James to move out from his brother, immediately invited him to stay with him. The house is a big man long ago divorced. The daughter has grown up and lives in another city. And Stephen told James that he would be only for joy if the guy will stay with him. And no money, of course, he will not take from him. James didn't have to be persuaded. Stephen was like family to him. He had grown up in front of the man's eyes. He was already sorting through his things in the spacious room with the large windows. As James pulled the neatly folded t-shirts out of the bag, at the bottom, his fingers came across a quadruple folded piece of paper. What is this? He unfolded the sheet, he thought. It turned out to be a farewell letter from Kathy. James had no time to say goodbye, so had decided to do it this way. In the letter, it was clear from the handwriting that the girl was in a hurry. "I've been planning my escape for a long time and preparing for it thoroughly. Remember when we met on the bus? That trip wasn't just for fun. It was one of the elements of preparation. You always asked me why I put up with all this and didn't leave Nick. You just don't know everything about me. After the orphanage, I fell in with some bad company. I drank, smoked. I had a wild life. Yeah, all of that. At the time, I didn't understand what Nick saw in me, why he chose me. Now I realize I was easy to manipulate, given my past, and Nick regularly needs to take out his anger on someone. Well, it's a character trait. I regret my past, of course, but unfortunately, those mistakes can't be undone. Now the whole point of my life is my son, and I can't lose him. Thank you for everything. Such good people in my life, met very few. I wish we'd met sooner. But you know, there's something else you should know. Back at the house, I couldn't open up to you about my brother because I get caught again. And now I have nothing to fear. Your father signed the will in an inebriated state. He didn't know what he was doing. I know for a fact he didn't plan on leaving you without an inheritance, but his illness progressed more and more each day. And more often than not, he was insane. That's when your brother took advantage. One day he bribed a notary. He was the one who came to our house. So when your father signed the will, he didn't realize what he was doing. But unfortunately, that's not all. When Nick and I were dating, I witnessed a scandal between your father and Nick. As far as I could understand, Dad somehow remembered that he had signed something and demanded to see the papers, but Nick refused. Then Dad said something I'll never forget. "You're never getting my store. I'm leaving all this to James. He's honest and much better than you." Nick then jumped out of the house, followed by Dad showing up. He was holding onto the wall with one hand and his heart with the other. That's when he started having a heart attack. I told Nick that I needed an ambulance, that Dad wasn't feeling well. But he just yelled at me, saying that the old man was just playing pity games, that your father was gone for the night. I'm so sorry. And I should have let you know. It's just that I heard Nick telling you that you were responsible for your dad's death. Don't believe that's a lie. I know for a fact that your father loved you very much and waited for you. Goodbye, James. Maybe we'll see each other again someday." James could not believe his eyes. He read the letter several times, but his brain refused to believe it. It couldn't be true. Nick couldn't have been so cruel to his father. Had he really left him alone? Didn't even call an ambulance. On the other hand, there was no reason not to believe Kathy either. As much as I didn't want to accept this information, but in his heart, James realized that everything written in the letter was the purest truth. Stephen suddenly interrupted the boy's musings by looking into the room. "James, how did you arrange the bedding in the closet on the top shelf? James, can you hear me?" The lad turned to the man and held out a piece of paper. "Read it, please," he asked. Mukina quickly ran his eyes over what was written, then sighed heavily, folded the letter, and looked at James. "What can I tell you? I'm not surprised at all. I told you even then that I didn't quite understand your father's actions. I mean, his actions didn't match his words. It just couldn't be. But I had no proof. It was just a hunch. Now you know the notary. Now we can deal with it. Start. Maybe you'll get something. Just don't drag it out. What's there to deal with?" Sam is a classmate of Nick's, if memory serves me correctly. "Do you really think he's gonna tell me the whole truth?" "Yeah, it's my fault. I'll make it up to you." "No, of course not. It's obvious he's in on it and knew it all from the start. But that's not what I'm worried about. I don't need it. It's an inheritance, Stephen. But you could have saved Dad, not left him alone. Then Dad could be alive now. I'll go to Kelly at once and sort it all out." The boy headed resolutely for the door, but Stephen immediately grabbed him by the shoulder. "Don't, James. You'll only make a mess of things. In this state of mind, everything must be done with a fresh head. It's a shame about your father, I agree, but you can't bring him back. But if you go to your brother, you could end up in a fight. And then what? That's right. You'll go back to where you just came from. I'm sick of freedom. He's gonna file a report on you right away. You bet he will. So what do you suggest?" James looked at the men. "Well, first of all, calm down, get a grip. Secondly, take a sick day at work, so you don't cross paths with your brother. Better yet, take care of your inheritance issues. Challenge the will. It'll hurt Nick more, believe me." Tomorrow morning, straight to Sam's, James decided to take his father's advice. And in the morning, just before it opened, he was at the door of the notary's office. He recognized Sam immediately. James wasn't wrong. It was definitely Nick's classmate. And it was obvious from the notary's face that he recognized James too. But as he came closer, Sam smiled fake smile. "Hi, James. How many years? How many winters? How long have you been out? What brings you here? No foreplay. Stop, James the notary. I'm thinking about my release. You know everything in detail. You better tell me this. How come my incapacitated father was able to make and sign a will for Nick? And what makes you think that your father was incapacitated at the time of signing?" Sam was surprised. "I personally dealt with the case. I came to your house because your father was ill and could hardly move. The will was also drawn up at home. Well, you know, your father was fully competent at the time, fully aware of his actions. I can attest to that in court. I even have independent witnesses, so everything here is done according to the law. Don't even doubt it." Sam, smirking echidically, stared directly into the eyes of James. Suddenly the latter, unable to stand it, grabbed the notary by the breasts and with all his might was coming against the brick wall of the building. But the notary only continued to smile. "And I see you've missed the zone. I can arrange a repeat trip to places not so remote, but for a longer period." Returning home in the evening, Stephen found James gloomier than a cloud. "I take it the result of the meeting with the notary is nil. Is he really Nick's classmate?" "Yes," nodded James. "He himself claims that everything was done according to the law. I went to a lawyer afterwards. I thought, what would he advise me in such a situation? What's the right thing to do? And he told me that there's nothing to be done. You just have to accept it. There's no medical examination, so there's no way to prove he's incompetent, and the rest is just words. And I can't prove that Nick bribed the notary and their witness." "Yeah, that's a bit of a stretch, Stephen. Unfortunately, I'm going to have to upset you even more. Your brother called me into his office today and yelled so much he drooled. He already knows you're living with me, but he said he doesn't care. But the fact that you went to the notary and threatened me." "I didn't threaten him." James was outraged. "It was just a little temper tantrum. James, it's not in your interest to go on a shooting spree. You understand, everything must be done according to the law. No amateurishness. This Sam has already reported everything to Nick. Your brother's furious. You have no idea how he yelled one word. You're fired as of today. Here's your papers." Nick threw them in my face. Told me not to show my face to him again. And my brother, by the way. He said he doesn't have one anymore. Well, that's to be expected. I don't want to see Nick myself. I'm afraid I won't be able to control myself. I was only staying with him for the picture. I was afraid to leave them alone together. And basically, I can say I don't have a brother anymore. You're talking about the law. According to the lawyer, I can't do anything. What are we left with? A notarized document against the word of a felon. That's ridiculous. Yeah, scratching the back of Stephen's head really isn't fun. What are you gonna do next? What I can do, I'm gonna look for another job. I can't be a bum sitting on your ass, but that's where I can help you." A man exclaimed. "I recently met a friend of my daughter. I do not remember exactly what her job title is, but I know that she delivers medicines to pharmacies. Well, she needs a driver because she can't drive. And the one from the other day quit. The only inconvenience is having to drive all over town. Well, I don't think that's gonna be a problem for you. So you'll do it?" "Yeah, sure, I'm in," James exclaimed. And in a couple of days he met Lucy and started his new job. Lucy turned out to be a cheerful girl with a short haircut and all the time tried to talk, silent on the first James. And the guy was not up to fun. He did not let go of heavy thoughts about his father and his mean brother. But in the end, James and Lucy became friends. To be honest, Nick was having a hard time with it, too. As soon as his girlfriend found out his wife had left him, she was at his door 2 hours later with her things, arriving without a call, just putting the man before the fact. I wonder what you expected. You're free now, which means there's nothing stopping us from being together. Your wife left you. I mean, sleeping with me means you're right there, but living together, we'll think about it. No, my dear, it won't work that way. Jenna, my wife is not gone forever. It's temporary. As soon as I carry her, I'll bring her back here. To what end? Exclaimed an indignant Jenna. She's made it clear to you that she doesn't want to live with you. Why would you force someone to do that? Especially since you're not alone. You have me, and I love you very much. Nick gritted his teeth like a toothache. He knew perfectly well what exactly Jenna loves: money. That's the only love she had. Jenna, we have a son in common, and in case you haven't forgotten, he continued to insist on his point. And my son has to live only with me. I will never give up on him. Okay. Immediately agreed the girl's son. Take the son and file for divorce. What's the problem? Aren't you going to raise him? What's wrong with that? Yes, I don't want my son to be brought up by a stranger's woman, no matter how she is, still a mother. So in your eyes, I'm a strange woman. That depends. Not to me, but to Kevin, yes. Okay, there's no point in arguing. That's what we'll do. You're here for now. Since the woman's here, the house still needs cleaning, eating, cooking. I don't mind. But as soon as I get my family back, you can't be here. And without any scandals or hysterics. Is that okay with you? No, it's not okay with Jenna's pouty lips. But I'll stay. Maybe I'll get lucky and you'll never find them. She's done a lot of planning for her escape. You can tell. Nick decided not to tell Jenna that he was currently in the process of divorcing Kathy. His plan had long been to divorce his wife officially and determine his son's place of residence with him. He had even paid all the right people so that there would be no problems. Soon, very soon, all the documents were to be in his hands, and that's when he'll find the picture from under the ground. He would get this scum and take away his son not just for nothing, but on the basis of the relevant documents. He knew perfectly well that his wife couldn't do without her son. And under such circumstances, she herself will come to him on her knees and will endure all the humiliation. He wouldn't let her come back right away. He planned to torture her for a long time to make her realize what a lowlife she is. But then, of course, he would bring her back, because Kathy was the one he saw as his wife, and certainly not Jenna. The latter has a family, and they could stand up for her daughter. And Jenna had a temper of her own. Nick was a little afraid of her himself. He knew if he laid a finger on her, she'd pull your hair out. Jenna was definitely not replaceable to the new Kathy. So he's looking for a wife, no matter what, especially since he already knows the train number and the carriage she left in. So he planned to talk to the conductor personally. Maybe he could find out at which station she got off. The man glanced nervously at his watch. Soon this very train will be passing through town, and the very conductor is on shift. So he had to get to the station right away. Good job, he muttered. Get dressed. But don't forget, it's only temporary. After these words, Nick flew out of the house and jumped into the car and drove in the direction of the station. There was still a lot of time before the train arrived, but his patience had run out. Like a hunter, he followed the trail of the beast. He knew he could never live in peace. He had not found his wife. The guide looked at the man glumly and muttered, "Well, actually, I've already answered all the questions. I remember her. She was still with child. But what station did she get off at? I can't tell you. I didn't see her." "Well, what if you try?" And Nick carefully put the 5,000th bill into his jacket pocket. The conductor carefully watched his movements and then said, "But you'd say it's important. Let me think about it. I'm afraid of being wrong, of course. But there are two possibilities. Either in Nellie she's gone off, or she's a bogra. No, wait. Kenya. It's a small town. Why didn't I see her get off? I opened the car door and went into the next car for a few minutes, for God's sake. And when the train started 2 hours later, I noticed the passenger was missing. And in the meantime, there were no other stops." Nice grin, Nick. "Thank you. You have no idea how much you've helped me." A few days later, James came home from work in the morning because he'd been traveling long distance and had been on the road all night, and found Stephen in a bad mood. He was glum and silent. "Had something happened?" James asked. "Yes. I don't even know how to tell you this, James." The man was silent for a moment. He sighed heavily, and Nick continued. "Your brother's been out of town for a couple days, and he came back last night with Kevin. And Kathy." James was worried. "She's here too." "That's the thing, she didn't. He came into the store last night, glowing with pride. He was telling everyone that he got his son back. He shouldn't have to live with a negligent mother. The boy needs a man's education." James' fatigue was gone. What to do? He pondered aloud. Kalinka would never give his son to him herself. "We must go to Kelly." "What do you think, Stephen? Is he still at home or already at work?" "But what work? Who's he going to leave his child with?" "Probably at home." But I'm going to my brother's. Take your time, James. It's none of your business. Koken's son and his wife. You're powerless in this situation. You can't help, but you'll get into trouble. The older man tried to stop him, but the guy only waved his hand at his words. He drove up to the house just as Nick was driving the cars out of the garage. "What about Kathy? Where is she?" shouted James on the run, ignoring his older brother, who tried his best to block his way into the house. But James managed to push him away and flew inside, running into the kitchen. He saw a young stranger with very bright, even a little vulgar makeup trying to feed porridge to Kevin. But the boy was crying, drinking food, and calling for his mom. "Who are you?" She stared at the unknown guest. "That's my brother." Nick's disgruntled voice was heard behind her back. "Don't worry, he's leaving now." "Answer me, where's Kathy?" James turned to his brother. "How the hell should I know? Yesterday she was in a small town called Kenneth. Where is she today? God only knows, and I don't really care about her, you know. I wanted a son, and as you can see, I got him back. What right did you have to take a child from its mother? Legally, just so you know, while that lunatic was hiding from me, I divorced her, and the court determined the son's place of residence with his father. And I'm the father, so that makes Kathy a criminal. She kidnapped my child from me. How could you do such a thing?" James couldn't believe his own ears. "I'm amazed at how despicable you are. Where did you get all this from? Kathy is a wonderful mother and doesn't deserve to be treated like this. That's from your point of view. But the court agrees with me that Kathy is a disgusting mother with a past like that." "Leave her past alone," James shouted. "I repeat, we are all sinners, you included. What matters is what we are today. Your wife's ex-wife is a good person now too. Or do you think he's the one pointing his finger at Jenna can replace her as a mother? That it's a worthy option. Actually, I hear everything." Tried to resent Jenna squeamishly swiping the remnants of porridge from the bright manicure. But the man did not even pay attention to her, continuing to argue. "I still haven't heard. Where's Kathy? What did you do to her? You mean you just took your son and left her in another town like nothing happened? Yeah, I wouldn't believe that for the life of me. You beat her up again. How many times have I told you to mind your own business? Well, don't worry. Soon your little picture will come crawling back to me begging for forgiveness. And I didn't even have to hit her to do it. Now get out of my house and don't make me call the police. And without the police, I'll be kicked out." James, clenching his fists, slowly approached his brother. Nick watched him warily and immediately slipped his hand into his pocket, frantically fumbling for his cell phone. "Come on, relax," the guy grinned. "I'm not going to get my hands dirty. I'm leaving. But I warn you, if Kathy doesn't show up soon, I'll be back. And that's when you'll be in trouble." But Kathy showed up that afternoon, close to evening, disengaged, with black circles under her eyes. The girl walked slowly toward the more familiar gate. After standing for a moment, she pressed the bell button with a shaky hand. James watched all of this, not far away in the work car that his boss allowed him to keep. He was sure that when she returned to town, the first thing she would do would be to see where her son was. And the guy wasn't wrong. But when he saw Nick open the gate, he pushed his wife away. His hands clenched into fists of their own accord. Kathy staggered, but managed to stay on her feet. What exactly Nick had yelled in her face, James hadn't heard. Yeah, it didn't matter. So the whole situation was clear. Then he defiantly slammed the gate in her face, and the girl remained standing outside the gate with her hands over her face. Her whole body shook with sobs. James started the car and cautiously approached Kathy. "Get in," he said, opening the passenger door. "He won't let you in the house anyway. There's no point in standing here. Get in," I said. The girl obediently sat down in the cabin, and again emotions took over, jabbing at his shoulder. She burst into tears again. How did he manage to find us? I was sure I had carefully concealed everything. The look in her eyes, full of despair and longing, made James's heart ache. He beat you. No, not really, but it doesn't matter now. I've seen the paperwork, James. He should have Kevin now. I no longer have rights to my son. I can only see him on weekends and only in front of Nick. How am I supposed to live? I don't know what to do. Don't worry. We'll find a way out, mumbled James. Right now, you need to calm down and come to your senses. I'll take you to a very nice man, Stephen. I live in his house, and I think there's room for you there. Meanwhile, on the second floor of the huge house, Nick opened the blinds a little. He watched the couple in the car with hatred. He saw that James was driving, who was currently hugging his wife, albeit his ex-wife. Nick wasn't going to break up with her for a second. Right now, he needed her to feel her petty nature. He would make her grovel for a long time before he would allow her to be reunited with her son. He must teach that ungrateful wench a lesson. Nick's fists even itched with anticipation. The car started abruptly and was soon out of sight. I wondered where my brother was taking my wife. But no, this wasn't how it was supposed to be. Nick had planned to keep his wife under the gate all night. That's when Jenna quietly entered the room. "What's next?" she said loudly. "Your wife showed up. How are we going to live? I really want to believe that you don't have the sense to welcome her with open arms. And I'm the mistress of this house now. I don't want to see your painting here. Your child is in my care, so don't even think about letting her in here. Are you trying to dictate terms to me?" Nick, if memory serves, the day you showed up uninvited, if anything, with your stuff, I warned you you were here on loan. And if you tell me what to do, you're out of here in a heartbeat. Oh, really? Bright eyes. Jenna, calm down and don't yell at me. I already told my parents we're living together now, and I'm not gonna embarrass myself in front of them. Married and divorced. You can forget about her. If you let her in here again, I'll give her a beating so bad she'll forget she ever came here. Don't you dare, yelled Nick. She has to come here and humiliate herself. That's part of my plan, and it's the part that gives me the most pleasure. No one was going to let her in the house now. And by the way, she can see her son, but only in my presence. In the morning, James woke up to an incomprehensible noise coming from downstairs. It seemed that there were guests at home early in the morning. But who could it be? He jumped up and started to get dressed, but he didn't have time to go out. Stephen came into the room, looking alarmed, to say the least. "James, there are policemen downstairs looking for the basket." "For what purpose? And why would they be looking for it in the next room? And why don't the police understand anything?" Stephen shifted from foot to foot, and it was obvious from his face that he wanted to say something else but couldn't find the words. "You're probably better than that, James. The news isn't good. Nick. Anyway, his body was discovered late last night. They say he was murdered, and well, they suspect a picture of the deed. Like murdered. It can't be." But there was no time for James to get an answer. 2 policemen entered the room. They quickly looked around the room, and one of them pronounced, "When was the last time you saw?" James still sat down on the bed because his legs refused to hold him. And without answering the question of the police, he asked them a counter question. "What about Nick?" "You don't know. Someone stabbed him with a sharp object last night. The stabbing went straight through the heart, and we suspect your sister-in-law." "Yes, James, have you been slow to make sense of what the cops said?" "Not anymore. Whatever it was, his brother was the only person he had in this world, and James would never wish him dead under any circumstances, not even after learning that he was indirectly responsible for his father's death." The policeman kept asking questions, but James heard them as if through absorbent cotton. Kathy looked at the policeman in surprise. "Why her? What makes you think Kathy is guilty?" "I know she had nothing to do with it. We came here together. She said she was tired and went to bed early last night. And have you seen her since?" The policeman asked. "We were just in her room. The bed was taken. Apparently, the girl never slept there. But that's no reason to suspect her of murder. So she couldn't sleep. So what? By the way, the brother wasn't living alone lately. His roommate, Jenna. Have you interviewed her? What did she say? Jenna. At her mom's house since yesterday afternoon. Her mom wasn't feeling well, so she went there. She spent the night at her parents' place too. But that's still no reason to suspect Kathy. Why her? James wouldn't let it go. Then I'm more likely to be the killer. First of all, my brother and I were fighting over the inheritance, and secondly, I was already in jail. You're right, agreed the policeman, and we'd certainly consider you for the role of murderer. Don't worry. But only if it weren't for one thing. Nick's neighbor, an elderly woman who suffers from insomnia, saw Kathy running out of the house in the morning with a baby in his arms. The second policeman, who until that moment had been silently shifting from foot to foot, suddenly uttered, addressing his partner, "Listen, enough. It's already clear that the girl is not here. We need to declare an interception plan before she skips town." The cops left, and James remained sitting on the bed, staring at one point. Stephen sat down beside him and handed him a mug of hot tea. "Have a drink, James. Have a drink. Come to your senses. I know it's hard to realize that Nick is gone, but life goes on." James clutched the cup of tea tightly in his hands, ignoring the fact that it was very hot. "I can't accept it. Stephen, first Dad, now Nick. Really, I didn't recognize my brother the last few days. He changed a lot during my absence. I never could get through to him. Maybe I should have just sat down and had a heart-to-heart talk. Maybe then he'd be back to his old self. James, has Nick always been like this? And did your father see it? I'm not condoning the picture, but it's his own fault for bringing it to this state. The girl was desperate and didn't realize what she was doing. He just gave her no choice. Do you believe the picture killed him too?" James looked at his companion in surprise. "James, did you hear the cops? They said that the neighbor saw Kathy running with Kevin in her arms. Because she went to bed in the evening doesn't explain anything. It's not like we can say she was there till morning. She could have left the house quietly at any time. Where do you think she'd go? Yeah, to her sons, of course. And then it all worked out so well. And she wasn't home either. They'd probably started fighting again. Maybe your brother even hit her. She couldn't take it anymore. Grabbed the first thing she could get her hands on. The police still haven't figured out what was used to stab her. The murder weapon wasn't found at the scene. I think it's more than obvious, James. I understand that you like Kathy. I like her too. She's a very nice girl. But you see, anyone, even the kindest, most positive person, can be driven insane. Especially if the bargaining chip is your kid. Kathy will probably go on the run again, and you need to organize your brother's funeral. There's no one else to do it. A funeral. I don't understand, James asked. He still couldn't come to his senses. He wished that everything that had happened had been a dream, just a nightmare. He woke up and it would all be over. But there was no waking up. His brother was gone. Kathy was gone again. Did he love her? Yes, now he could admit it to himself. He was willing to go through all the hardships with her and fight for Kevin. James had always imagined how great it would be for the three of them, him, Kathy, and Kevin. But now it was all empty. He stood up, setting the cup of tea on the nightstand that was already there. The boy never touched it. Then slowly turned to Stephen. "You're right. I'll take care of it. Don't worry about it. I just don't agree with you about the painting. Well, she couldn't have taken her brother's life. I really want her and Kevin not to get caught. At least not until they figure out who the real killer is. You and I know how my brother did business, so she wasn't the only one who might have wanted him dead." But a few hours later, word got out that Kathy and the baby had been found, caught at the train station as she was about to board the train. Seeing a police squad heading in her direction, she threw her arms around her son, and thus confirming her guilt in the eyes of the police. Nick's funeral was crowded. Many people in town knew him, but it wasn't just acquaintances who came. It wasn't a big town, and people liked to gossip. And this was a big deal. A big store owner was murdered in his own house. And who did it? His wife. His own wife. Really, it's all the talk of the town. Jenna sobbed the loudest, with a beautifully tied black silk scarf on her head. And when the coffin began to be lowered into the grave, she went up to James and squeezed his wrist to the point of pain and whispered, "But even looking at it, the picture, thank God, she was captured. Let them lock her up for a long time. People like that shouldn't be out of jail at all. She ruined our whole lives with that knee. And we were going to get married. He even asked me to marry him the other day. So now I'm practically his lawfully wedded wife. So what's the bottom line? The Hares, if I'm not mistaken, are you and his son." As the conversation progressed, Jenna's tone changed at the end. People who saw Nick off to his last journey began to involuntarily listen, wanting to catch the essence of the conversation of the relatives of the deceased. Those who were particularly curious even tried to get closer, but James pulled her back. "Let's leave the inheritance talk for later. I haven't thought about it yet." "No, of course you haven't." He grinned evilly at Jenna, straight-up innocent sheep. Dab and her brother hated each other. Kathy was a murderer. So the only one who was close to Nick and really loved him, that's me. And I'm gonna be out of business because we didn't get the damn stamps at the registry office. Jenna's tears dried immediately, and there was only a greedy light in her eyes. James couldn't help but wonder. He hadn't known her until now, but it took him a few minutes to realize that she and Nick were worthy of each other. Her brother certainly wouldn't dare raise his hand at her. That would probably backfire too. James took a close look at her face, though. Despite the fact that it was strong, up close, it was obvious that the plump lower lips was not a gift of nature, but the result of a blow. Consequently, things between her and Nick were not all that smooth as she was trying to present here. It had been rough too. Even later, in the dining room, acquaintances began to approach James with expressions of condolence. James nodded. Look, what a wonderful man his brother had been. But it was flattering. Lying only made him feel disgusted. All he saw in his eyes sad them only curiosity. They were genuinely interested in who would get all the stores now. So they came up to shake James' hand. Although a few days ago, many of them, having met James on the street, would not even say hello to the former criminal. At some point, the guy felt like he might explode. He wanted so badly to yell, "Enough." Nick was not a saintly, kind-hearted man. What are you all saying? And you know it. And Kathy is not a brutal murderer who's in jail. Stephen had an eagle eye on James, sensed his mood. The man was there instantly. He put a hand on the guy's shoulder and said, "Well, I guess it's time to sit down at the tables. Let's remember Nick." And after dinner, James went over to Stephen's. "Would you mind if I stayed with you for a while?" He asked the man. "I can't stay in a house where first my father died, and then my brother was gone." "Yes, of course," Stephen smiled. "Of course, you can stay here permanently, but you'll still have to deal with the house. If you can't live there, you can sell it." "Stephen, I'm in no condition to talk about this right now. I'm thinking about the painting. Do you think they'll let me talk to her? I'd like to ask her myself how it all came about." "Well, why not?" The man shrugged. "Dating. It's not illegal. We could try to get a meeting. We just need to find a lawyer." James managed to get a date with Kathy after a few days. And there he was, sitting across from this pale girl. And the first thing he heard from her was, "James, I didn't do it. I didn't kill Nick." He exhaled. He believed her right away. Well, Kathy couldn't lie like that. Looking him in the eye, she wasn't like that. Then how did all this happen? "Kathy, you went to your room last night and ended up at my brother's. Why did you even go to his place at night?" "Not at night. It was morning, but very early. I couldn't sleep. So I decided to go to Nick's to wait for him to leave for work. I wanted to beg him to let me see Kevin for at least 10 minutes. The buses weren't running yet, so I walked. And when I got to the house, I saw the gate was open. So I went in, and there, well, I ran into Nick. He was lying on the first floor with his arms spread out. There was no one else in the house. What do you think I should have done? I was confused at first, but then I ran into the nursery, grabbed Kevin out of his crib, and ran. At first I just wanted to go back to the Stephen house. Yeah, I did. I realize now that I should have called the police right there in the house. But I'm telling you, I was scared out of my mind. I realized later, when I was running away with Kevin, that I could be blamed for everything. So I ran to the train station. So what are you saying? James got agitated. The murder was committed in the evening, and you came to the house in the morning. Did you tell the coroner about this? What's the reason you're still here? Why aren't they letting you go? James, are you really that naive, or are you just pretending to be? Who's gonna believe me now? There's too much against me. Besides, Nick and I were divorced, and I already tried to run away from him with my son. There are plenty of witnesses who can confirm our scandals outside the house. Everyone knows I wanted to take the baby for myself. I don't think my innocence can be proven anymore. Is that wrong? James exclaimed. Don't worry. I'll find a good lawyer and get you out of here. Kalina stared intently into James's eyes. Do you trust me? I don't care about anyone around me, but it's important that you believe me. I do, and I'll do my best to help. Thank you, James. You don't have to thank me. I was in the same position myself once, but unlike you, I did take a man's life, and you never once condemned me for it. Do you remember? James tilted his head, thought for a moment, and then suddenly said, but on the other hand, Karen, even if you had really killed Nick, I'd still be on your side. I saw with my own eyes how he treated you, and I realized that you could have just been defending yourself. No one can understand you better than me. James interrupted Kathy's boyfriend. Our time is coming to an end. I'm being led now, and I won't have time to ask you for the most important thing. If the situation is not resolved in my favor, and I am still accused of this murder, I will not let my nephew grow up in an orphanage. Who better than me to know how bad it is out there? It's even worse if they take custody of him, just because he's the heir. Take my son with you. I can trust you because I know you love him, and he'll be fine with you. It's too soon to talk about that. I believe we can prove our innocence. You're not going to jail. Remember what time you left the house. And the way you walked home. Nick, there's no way anyone but your neighbors saw you. I'll take the same streets and ask all the tenants to prove enough that you went there in the morning and not in the evening, when your brother was killed. Stephen looked at James with sympathy. James, look, you've been all over the place. You don't even have time to eat. How many times? Don't you realize you won't find any witnesses? And if you do, they won't be in Kathy's favor. But the kid just kept shaking his head. There must be someone who saw her that morning. She didn't go in the morning. She left in the evening. You can't see that she's lying, and I can understand it. That girl can't confess to you that she killed your brother. She doesn't want to do time. But the picture's coming together nicely. Kalina came to see her son. Nick raised his hand to her again. So she poked her ex-husband with whatever she could get her hands on. No, it wasn't anything. We already know it was sewing scissors. Again, where those scissors were kept, no stranger could have known. They were only used by Kathy before the divorce. That's another fat point against her. No, James moved his eyebrows stubbornly. Regardless, he continued to run the streets. He'd already avoided the entire route Kathy had taken to get to her ex-husband's house that morning, if her words were to be believed. James knocked on houses, questioned people in examining the recorders installed on cars parked that morning that the girl might have gotten into. But it was all in vain. Every night Stephen argued that Kathy was lying and that she was guilty. And James slowly began to doubt her innocence. Then one day he met a young boy who lived not far from Nick's house. When he saw the picture of the painting, he looked at it for a long time and then said, "I think I saw it, but not in the morning. She came in the evening. We were just with the guys going for a ride, and I went out of the house. And I think this girl was heading that way. The kid waved his hand in the direction of Nick's house. But she looked a lot like her, although I'm not 100% sure. And that's when a seed of doubt, of apprehension began to sprout in the boy's heart. Was Kathy lying to him? Maybe Stephen is right, and it's hard for her to admit to James that she killed his brother. But he told her he'd be on her side anyway. He wouldn't convict. James found a good lawyer who quoted a price that made the guy's eyes pop. All the savings that the guy managed to save during his working life. He did not have enough and had to borrow in Stephen. After all, the inheritance. James still hadn't come into his inheritance. The lawyer tried his best. On the eve of the trial, James met with him. You know, James, I'll be honest with you. I regret taking this case because it's a failure. There's not a single defense witness. I mean, you've tried so hard, but you haven't found one. Most likely Kathy is guilty, and the court will easily prove it. There's too much against the girl. What if there is a witness? James exclaimed. What if that witness is me saying I spent the whole night with Kathy? I wouldn't advise it. The lawyer gave James a piercing look. I wouldn't advise you to do that. It's too late to make a statement like that. No one will believe you now. I wish they had. And now Kathy's almost proven guilty, which means you'll be perjuring yourself on the stand. And given your past, I don't think you want to do that. You were punished for what you did and didn't believe, despite your dead father's money. And in Kathy's case, there were more circumstances from the holler. She won from the orphanage. So there was intent. The prosecutor would push for it and ask for the maximum sentence for the girl. James had goosebumps running up and down his spine. Maximum? How much? Well, under this article, it's 16 years. Well, I don't think she'll get the maximum. James' lawyer hastened to reassure James, seeing the terror in his eyes. And I'll try to get it reduced. At the trial, Kathy cried the whole time. The prosecutor shouted, making the girl look like a calculated murderer of a respected citizen of the city. Unexpectedly for James, Jen appeared as a witness for the prosecution. She diligently recounted how Kathy wiped out near her and Nick's house every night, how she had stolen the baby once before and run away with it to another town, and how Nick had tried his best to keep her out of the house because he was afraid she might hurt them all. After all, she had a very hot temper. This is where James' patience broke, and he shouted from his seat that it was a lie. Kathy, on the other hand, is a calm and balanced person, and the violent character was possessed by the murdered man himself, who repeatedly raised his hand against his wife. The judge reprimanded James, and then Kathy's past came up. No matter how hard he tried, Kathy's lawyer gave him 10 years. Upon hearing the sentence, the girl burst into tears. As she was led away from the courtroom under escort, she kept turning her head to look for James, and when she found him, she screamed, "James, take Kevin. I beg you, and take Kevin for yourself." The guy was almost crying as he left the courtroom. "You weren't much help, were you?" he said reproachfully to the lawyer. "Believe me, I did everything I could," he said. "If it wasn't for me, the girls would have given even more." We'll appeal. Stephen, who knew James' home, was not surprised to hear about the sentence. "Honestly, I thought it'd be less. What are you gonna do next? You're gonna leave it as it is?" "No, of course, my lawyer, and I will appeal. But we have a bigger problem right now. Kevin's been placed in an orphanage, and Kathy's been asking me to take my nephew for myself. Do you think that's possible?" Stephen was surprised. "The little one's a year and a half old. How are you gonna handle a kid that small? What do you even know about babies? That's one thing. And secondly, what makes you think they'll give it to you? What's the problem?" "I'm a relative." "Yeah, a relative with a very interesting background and no marriage. I'd be happy to be wrong. But first of all, why don't you go to the child welfare office and see how much chance you have in this case? I'm sure there will be plenty of people wanting custody of Kevin. And you know the reason as well as I do." James rushed straight to the child welfare office. Once again, Stephen was right. There was very little chance that Kevin would be given to James, and the primary reason for the refusal was his criminal record. If the guy had at least been married, that would be a whole different conversation. So what's the problem? Well, get married, Stephen smiled, and then he faltered when he saw the gleam in James's eyes. If anything, I was kidding. Or do you have a fiancé in mind? Why would I have a fiancé? I mean, you could have a sham marriage. Find a normal, adequate girl. You explain everything. You sign the papers. I'll take Kevin. We'll be married for a year, and then we'll get a divorce. The nephew will stay with me anyway. James shook her head. Stephen, you've completely lost your head not to go crazy. Why do you have to go to all this trouble? Of course, nothing good in the fact that the nephew is brought up in an orphanage with living relatives. But maybe you should wait a little longer to adopt. Maybe you'll meet some worthy ones along the way. And marry for love. I don't have time, Stephen. And besides, I've already met someone worthy. I know exactly who I want to marry for love, but due to certain circumstances, we can't be together yet. But she asks me to take her son. And without her requests, I would never have let my nephew go to a state home. The next day, James walked briskly into the cafe and saw Lucy sitting at the table. He'd called an hour ago and arranged to meet her here. James, you're late. Pretending to be, angrily, muttered the girl. Kind of unemployed right now. You can't make it to a meeting on time. I'm sorry for running around for everything. But I see you didn't waste any time either. Decided to have a big lunch, nodded James on a large portion of pilaf, standing in front of the friend. Of course I did. Why should I starve while you're waiting for me to get here? All right, spit it out. What happened? From what I hear, all your hard work went to waste. Kathy got locked up. Yeah, that's right. There's not much to tell. You tell me. Did you find a driver to take my place? I found another driver, but no friend, smiled the girl. It's all right. You and I didn't become friends right away. Not the right case. In your place is now a distinct pensioner. With him, even I cannot be friends. A purely business relationship, laughed Lucy. She was generally a cheerful, easygoing girl. James could relax with her. This girl could find a reason to laugh in any situation, even the most difficult. After his brother's funeral, James had to quit because all his time was spent trying to prove Kathy's innocence. In addition, Stephen insisted that James return to the store as a supervisor, so that Kevin wouldn't end up with an unprofitable business in the future. Yeah, after all, the stores were his father's baby. And no matter what the circumstances, business had to continue. Lucy, look, James said, you and I have discussed many topics, but you've never said anything about your personal life. You have a boyfriend, but a favorite fiancé. I don't know how to put it right. Lucy almost choked on a sip of coffee, which she decided to wash down her dense lunch, returning the cup with the drink on the table. She looked at James with wide-open eyes. Why the questions? Not out of curiosity. You're right. I was going to ask you for your help to propose a sham marriage to me, so that Kevin would be given to me. I'm in, and that's what Lucy said. You can't ask about anything right away. You can't even think about it. I've already thought about everything. The girl smiled. The other day we talked to Stephen. He told me everything. I guessed the reason for our meeting, but I decided to play the surprise until the last. I'm very good at it. It's true that each of you sees the situation differently. Stephen wants you to have the baby, but only so you can run the stores. But I'm sure you just love your nephew and some other people. That's true, isn't it? Once again, James nodded. Jenna is also a candidate for the role of guardian. The girl who's been living with Nick lately. There's no way that's going to happen. She doesn't want the boy. She's after the inheritance. So I can count on you, Lucy. Yes, of course. Why not? I'm free as a bird at the moment. And what's not to help a friend? I rarely say this, but you're a good man. Prison hasn't spoiled you. People like you are very rare. The boy should definitely be with you. Wait together for your Kathy, and you'll be happy. We could get married tomorrow. Except maybe we should make it look like we're living together. And you and I should have a house. Do you have a plan?" And I did have a plan. After my brother's death, one very interesting detail came to light. It turned out that the will signed by his father only covered the business, and it didn't say a word about the house. Nick simply lied to his brother about the real estate in the hope that he would not specify. So he did. And now that everything was out in the open, James could easily be the sole owner of the house. That's where he planned to live with Kevin. At least for the first time, to sign the day after Lucy was ready. The couple didn't make it. Well, they didn't have to wait a month at the registry office. Stephen all arranged the necessary acquaintances, and a small gratitude in cash equivalent played a role. And in a week, James and Lucy officially became husband and wife. Lucy turned out to be a good actress. In front of the guardianship authorities, she was a nice homegirl. Tattoos covered with sleeves, and even wore a dress almost for the first time in her life. Custody had to be fought for. In addition to Jenna was drawn and distant relatives, the existence of which James did not even suspect. The guy had to go through 33 instances, knocking on all the doors. But at least then justice prevailed. As Stephen put it, Kevin was given to his own uncle, though he joined once, but now he is an exemplary family man with a big house. James would never forget the day he came to the infant home to pick up his nephew. How fast was Kevin running toward him? With his little legs, the boy had lost a lot of weight, and when James hugged him, the little boy closed his skinny arms around his neck. At that moment, James had tears in his eyes. Lucy, on the other hand, immediately made her stand. She helped James. She had married him legally, but quit her job and devote all her time to taking care of the child. When they moved into James' parents' house, fictitious spouse took a spacious room on the second floor, and James and Kevin were placed on the first floor. Kevin did not leave James without attention for a minute. Everywhere crowds follow him like a tail. The boy suffered stress after his stay at the orphanage. It took about a month before Kevin began to resemble his old self, a cheerful, active boy. That's when Stephen was more active on James. "James, I understand, of course. A child demands maximum attention, but you can't leave your father's business. The stores are running at a loss. I told you, I'm not a manager and I can't manage. That's even more fun, you know. Business has been bad. And now we need a firm hand. What are you waiting for? For Dad's business to go bankrupt? You've officially become the heir's guardian, taking over and putting things in order. How am I supposed to leave this? There are two options. Either we put the boy in a nursery or we hire a nanny. No, the nursery's not right for us. Kevin's not out of the nursery yet, but not Anya. James, all I'm asking is that you don't drag it out. There's nowhere else to go. If you want, I can help you. I know a woman of pre-retirement age. Of course, she has no special education, but she has a wonderful experience with children, and most importantly, kind and responsible. For this I vouch. Do you want me to talk to her?" James hesitated to leave Kevin with a strange woman the guy did not want. But on the other hand, Stephen, it's time things in the stores were going badly, and James knew why and how to fix it. "All right, Stephen, you got yours? Talk to your friend. Have her come over. I'll take a look at her." Lucy and Kevin, sitting right on the living room floor, on a huge fluffy rug, were assembling a large castle from a constructor. The boy was engrossed and panting with pleasure, building tall towers. Lucy, though she didn't mind. Sometimes Kevin ate with hidden irritation. Every now and then he glanced at the clock hanging on the wall. She had a date in an hour, and James still hadn't returned from his store. Well, finally, the girl exclaimed when she saw her fictitious husband entering the living room. "I've been waiting for you for ages. I have to run away." "Why are you sitting with Kevin? Where is Maria?" asked James. Picks up in his arms, sweat running to him, "Child. James, did you even look at the clock? Let Maria go. I mean, she needs to be home sometimes. But you know, I didn't expect you to hold on so tight, did I? Sorry, a lot of paperwork piled up, even though I've only been away for 3 days. And by the way, you never told me about your trip. How's Kathy holding up? Yeah, I wouldn't say she's holding up. She's lost a lot of weight. You can tell she's got nothing but her eyes. It's bad. Pictures of her in prison, real bad. The only joy in her life, as she told me herself, was my arrival and the new pictures of Kevin. She couldn't tear herself away from them. Kathy says that Kevin looks happy in the pictures, and that makes her happy. But still, looking at her, I don't think she'll last long there. We have to do something. We have to do something. But what? What can you do, James? You've done everything you can. There's nothing you can do. Besides, let's say you're sure Kathy didn't kill your brother. Stephen and I have our own version. What's more delicate than that? On the contrary, I'm sure Kathy's in jail for the case. What do you mean? It wasn't her fault, of course. Her husband must have beaten her. I think there should be an article. A different one. In a state of effect, for example. But for that she had to confess. She's the one who pushed your brother out of desperation. And I'm sure, but Kathy says she did. I don't know what Kathy says. That's it, James. I really don't have time for this. It's already been said 1,000 times. Okay, Kevin's had dinner. I left. Lucy didn't get home until the morning. It was a day off, and it was safe to go to bed. But there was no sleep in the girl's eyes. She sat patiently in the kitchen and waited for James to come out for breakfast. You've been home a long time. Why are you sitting there? Asked James when the girl waited for him. Here you are, waiting while you are sick. I heard the door slammed. Maria came in. Yeah, she's in the nursery dressing Kevin. What did you want to talk about? Listen, James, here's the thing. Anyway, last night, my confidence was a little low. I already told you about the guy from the beleaguered salon I'm dating. We spent the whole night together tonight. Look, let's skip the details, James grumbled. I love you, of course, but not enough to listen to all that. Okay. No one was going to give you the details. We spent the whole night with him. And naturally, we had a chance to talk about a lot of different things. And I learned something. Turns out Jenna's mom is getting massages from Anthony. And she's a very chatty woman, I must say. And what she likes to talk about most is her daughter, touting her virtues. I mean, she's got to get her to someone. How perky Jenna is, how confident she is, how she can stand up for herself. No man would ever raise a hand to Jenna. No consequences. And the one who did, still in the picture as if alive. Anthony certainly doesn't listen much to the chatter of his clients. But at this point, Jenna's mom had stopped talking as if she'd said too much. And Anthony was alarmed by this moment. There's something else. Remembered Jenna's alibi. Allegedly, on the day Nick died, her mother was sick, and she had to go to her house before lunch. Well, in fact, that very afternoon, Jenna's mom was at Anthony's for a massage, and she was feeling fine. Wait, get excited, James. This was definitely the day. Your Anthony can't be wrong. He could be if he didn't keep records of all his massages and his clients. He always has a notebook of those notes in his car, and he and I double-checked it. It's absolutely accurate. So what's the story? James was almost screaming with excitement. Jenna was lying. So her mom wasn't sick, and she probably didn't leave the house that day. She could have killed Nick. Parents are parents to confirm their children's alibis. That's it. That's what I was thinking, Lucy said grimly. But don't get too excited. It doesn't prove anything. And the police won't even talk to you about it. Lucy, you know, Jenna calls me a lot. At first, she wanted to meet Kevin, but she said she missed him, wanted to come here to the house. And when I suggested we meet on the playground during a walk, she immediately refused. And now she says that she has some things left in this house, and she needs to get them urgently. So I offered to give them to her myself. But again, Jenna refused. She says she doesn't remember where things are and wants to look for them herself. In general, there is a burning desire to get into our house. I didn't think it was strange at first. But now, with the recent news, I'm curious. Lucy was very curious. That's what Jenna's up to. Maybe there's something here that confirms she didn't leave the house that day. And Jenna wants to destroy it. Or the murder weapon. It hit James. Now let's say Jenna stabbed Nick with the scissors and they weren't found near the body. What did she do with them? Took them with her. And if she didn't, what if she hid them somewhere in the house and now she wants to take them out? But she's been very insistent on coming to our house, and that's a variant of you sometimes think. Lucy said with a respectful glance at her friend. And what should we do with you in this case? I know we should install cameras all over the house and invite Jenna. But that would be very expensive. Lucy exclaimed. Imagine, cameras in every room would cost you so much money. If there's any chance of proving Kathy's innocence, I don't care about any money. Stephen was angry. You bet, James was on fire with delusions again. When will he finally realize that Kathy is in jail for the case? She did it herself. And it's useless to prove her innocence. Business at the store only got a little better. And James took some of the proceeds so he could install cameras all over the place. And now he's come to him for help. Stephen, well, you have to understand, it's for a reason. I've been doing a lot of thinking. Jenna's behavior is very suspicious. At the cemetery during the funeral, I noticed her lip was split. Maybe Nick hit her too. God only knows what happened between them afterward. Let's check it out. Do you know anyone on the police force? Yeah, an old man waved his hands in the air. He sometimes comes here to the store for parts for his foreign car. Well, he and I can talk about the weather. That's all. But this is serious business. What you're doing requires a search warrant. Do you need probable cause? There isn't, James. What you're saying is bullshit. You're just grasping at straws. No one in the police force is going to take that into account. And if it's for money? With a desperate gleam in your eye, James asked, I've never paid a bribe in my life. And frankly, I don't know how. But if you give, as they say, a bribe, then I think the policeman will go along with us. Stephen shook his head tiredly. All right, James, I'll try to help you again. Let's just agree with you one last time. I mean, your fixation on Kathy's innocence. If things don't work out with Ira now, you'll settle down. Promise me that you'll settle down and laugh off Kathy's time served, and you'll wait for her like you should for 10 years. And Jenna was desperate to get into the house where she used to live with Nick. But one day James called her, and it was a surprise. I'm home tonight. You can come pick up whatever you want. And why did you suddenly get there so soon? She asked suspiciously. Well, the house, I think, to sell things we'll still have to take out. So if there's something of yours here, come and take it. What's the matter? That's a relief, Jenna. So you're selling after all. Okay, I'll come by tonight at 7 o'clock. That'll be fine. When Jenna gingerly crossed the threshold of the house, it seemed to her that it would be easy. But nevertheless, the terrible memories of Katya or the girl wave, it was strange. Jenna did not consider herself an impressionable person. James met the girl on the first floor. Hi, want some tea? Kevin and I are having dinner. I wouldn't say no. The girl was glad that James was already busy in the kitchen. Perfect. There was just one more thing Jenna was worried about. Is your wife home? She asked. Glanced around the stairs to the second floor. No, Lucy's not home. Kevin, say hello. Do you remember Aunt Jenna? The boy looked indifferently at his unfamiliar aunt. He certainly didn't remember her. In the kitchen, James put the vegetable stew on the plates and realized, and we might as well have dinner with us. Oh, no. I'll just have tea. The girl waited for James and Kevin to start eating, making sure they wouldn't be getting up from the table anytime soon. Sipped the tea and grumbled. Oh, it's so hot. Let it cool down a bit. I'll be going now. I'll get what I was going to get. I'm going up to the second floor. Do you mind? Let me, of course, without blinking an eye, the guy answered. Jenna went out and closed the door behind her. Lucy, who was actually in the house, was sitting, and at this very moment in the room under the stairs of the very room that Nick had once allocated for James, and through a slit in the open door. Lucy watched her guest and was a little startled when Jenna, instead of going to the second floor, rushed under the stairs. It seemed to Lucy that Jenna was about to burst into that room. But the one stopped early. She shook her hand deep into the stairwells and pulled out from there an object gleamed chief her hands from the color of the chandelier. Jenna slipped the find into her small purse with lightning speed and then headed for the second floor. Lucy, holding the phone in her hands, called out, "Come in. Come in right now. She needs to be searched right away." She put something in her bag. Jenna went downstairs without a care in the world. With a sense of accomplishment, she'd done what she'd come here to do. She didn't need any more of these ridiculous conversations with James, and she didn't really want to have tea with them. The only thing she wanted to do was to get out of this house quickly and get rid of the fire that lived in the purse clutched tightly to her body. Jenna shuddered as she walked down to the first floor and ran into a crowd of people. There stood James, Lucy, Stephen, and worst of all, two men in police uniforms. One of the policemen held out his hand to Jenna. "Let me see your bag." "On what grounds?" screamed Jenna, clutching her hands tightly to the accessory. "And on that basis," answered for the policeman. Smirking snidely, "Lucy, that I saw with my own eyes how you pulled something from the stairwells. Something very interesting. I was sitting in this room, and I saw everything." Lucy pointed her hand under the stairs. "She's lying. She had nothing to see." "I could be lying, of course," Lucy continued. "There's no camera." "What cameras?" Jenna's eyes ran frightenedly. The girl frantically looked around the walls to her horror. Only now she came across a faintly visible red light. Yes, you're not wrong. That's exactly the camera. And it's got the right angle. It's covering the area under the stairs. What the hell is going on here?" Yelling Jenna. "Let me out of the house. I don't know what you want from me. You're crazy. I'm not gonna let you look in my bag. You have no right. You need a warrant for that. Or what do you call it?" "He's laughing," the policeman said calmly. "Here you are, please." He shoved a paper under Irina's nose. "Now I'm going to have to examine your purse." Jenna struggled like a tiger, clutching at the leather strap. But the forces were unequal, and the bag ended up in the hands of the policeman. One of them opened it, looked at the others, and then with a napkin carefully extracted an object lying right on top of it. That object turned out to be sewing scissors, picks, stains on the point. "There, I told you so." "You," exulted James, almost throwing herself hard with joy. "Surprised at you." "Wow," hummed the man. "Yes, James, you were right this time. I never would have guessed." "Oh, Jenna, what was it like for you to watch an innocent woman, Kathy, go to jail?" "Innocent? Why would she be innocent? I don't know what you're talking about. What is this?" "It's not mine at all. I don't know how those scissors ended up in my bag. You planted them on me. Let me out, and I'll go home." Jenna got in trouble, trying to shove the people in front of her. But the cops took her firmly under the elbow. "Are you under arrest?" one of them announced briefly. "What do you want here?" with anger asked Jenna, who had come to see her in the detention center. "James, what are you doing here?" "I wanted to talk to you." "Why did you do it? Why did you kill my brother?" "Oh, what hypocrisy. You hated your brother as much as he hated you. And she didn't kill anyone." First there was Jenna, and then she looked back at the escort who had brought her in. The uniformed man was standing far enough away that he couldn't hear their conversation. Jenna's face twisted with rage and she was carried away. "You know I'm going to tell you, though. You're already figuring it out. What's the big deal? Why did I kill your brother, you ask? Because he was an asshole. He took advantage of me for the smallest of favors. I never got any real expensive gifts from him. I moved into his house. I was gonna live with him, get married, adjust, live, cook him dinners, lunches, breakfasts. That doesn't sound like me at all. I turned into a housewife. But you know, I wanted to marry him. I really did. And why did he keep looking for his stupid Kathy? And when he did, he brought a baby home and made me babysit it. And even after that coup de grace, I was ready to move on with him. To look after a boy I didn't need at all. Your brother just waited until he decided to bring his ex-wife back into the house. And he told me to get out of the house. Can you imagine getting out of the house like a used rag? He just wiped my feet. And when I started to make reasonable complaints to him in raised tones, he hit me with all his might in the face, smashed my lip. That's when I went into a rage. Nobody treats me like that. And I wasn't going to kill him anyway. No, I wasn't. I knew where those scissors were. I opened the drawer. I jammed them in with my hand. I wanted to poke him in the shoulder, but your brother's a coward. He tried to dodge, and it hit him in the chest. Nick collapsed like a Leatherman. That's where I sang. I panicked bad. I should have gotten those scissors out of the house right away. And I panicked like a fool and put them under the stairs before I had a chance to think about it. So your parents knew and deliberately covered for you. My mom knew, so what? That's why she's my mom. She's proud of me too, and she thinks I should never get hurt. Yeah, she is. What did you want? Except, you're the only one who heard everything I said in here. I really wanted to get it out. I'm tired of keeping it all inside. But no one else will hear it from me. I'll deny my guilt to the end. No one can prove anything with a pair of fucking scissors. Not a bloody pair of scissors, but the murder weapon. James answered calmly. Today it became known that fingerprints were found on them. Yes, that can't be true, Jenna exclaimed. I erased them. Well then, James smirked. A couple of prints were found. Next time you kill someone, be careful. The case has been remanded, and Kathy will be released soon. Kathy, are you and your brother obsessing over that blessed girl? It's all her fault. Letting her husband use her as a punching bag. All Nick had to do was fight back in the beginning, like I did. If only that coward hadn't tried to dodge, he'd have gotten off with a blank shoulder. And Kathy deserves to go to jail. I'll have the best lawyer in the world, and they won't prove I'm guilty. So they won't let your basket go. Don't be happy. But Kathy was released. The girl sobbed when she saw her son. She had already resigned herself to the fact that she would have to serve a full term and could not believe what was happening. It seemed to Kalina that this was just a dream, and it was about to end, and she would have to return to the horrible prison routine. Lucy and James watched with a smile on their faces as Kathy pulled Kevin against her and squeezed him so tightly that it hurt a little at times. Despite this, Kevin never once ventured out, never complained, but only pressed himself against his mother, clutching his hands into her thick hair. As the girl gave birth to her arms and let her son go to the floor, she poisoned herself, examined herself. I need to wash up. I need a shower right away. Why do you ask? Stupid laughed. Sure, go ahead, be afraid. I'll get you a towel and a clean robe. After Kathy left to wash herself off the smell of prison, Lucy glanced cheerfully at James. Well, hubby, our marriage is coming to an end. Who's going to file first, you or me? Whatever, James shrugged. You want to go together. I hope you're not mad at me. You've been helping me so much. You're my closest friend, Lucy. You don't have to leave this house if you want. Stay as long as you want. I think I'm gonna take you up on your offer. When I found out Kathy was cleared of all charges, I made a decision I've been making for a long time. I'm gonna be here for another week. And in that time, I'll get my affairs in order, and then I'll leave. Where are you going? James exclaimed. What are we gonna do without you? Well, you'll manage somehow. Lucy said, I'm going to the metropolis. I'll make up my mind this week. Maybe I'll find my destiny in a big city. I hope so, said James and stepped forward and hugged her. Lucy, this is so great. Thank you for everything. For being you, for meeting you. If I didn't have you and Stephen right now, things would be really bad. I know that. Oh, Don't give me any of that tenderness. Lucy poked James in the shoulder with her fist. Because I'm so upset, I'm going to cry. And I'm not supposed to have an image. Besides, why are you hugging me? I'm not leaving yet. You told me I'd be gone a week. We'll cuddle in a week. Kevin was long asleep and Kathy was still sitting next to his crib. She could not take her eyes off the native pilot. The girl spent almost the whole day with her son and still could not believe in what was happening. Could something good really happen to her? Behind the nursery door, the floors creaked. Kathy knew it was James, shuffling from foot to foot in there for the last hour, waiting for her to come out. They hadn't talked, and talk they should. Was Kathy ready for that conversation? Yes, she was. The girl got up from her chair, turned down the brightness, put on her headphones, and walked out to James. Kathy, you will marry me, blurted out James the lyrics to Shiny. If it's been on his tongue since morning. That's how confused Kathy was at once. I thought you were still married. You know what marriage is and what it was for, don't you? Lucy. She's Lucy. She's a wonderful person, finished Kathy. I'm very grateful to her for the boyfriend. I didn't get the chance today, but I'll be sure to tell her that. And yes, James, of course I'll marry you. That and yourself. That's you know how I feel about you. James took Kathy's hand and pulled her to him. Did the girl pull away? No, not now. I'm sorry, but I'm not ready yet. There's some kind of moral block inside. I don't know if you understand me. I understand, James sighed. I'll wait. He turned around and went to his room. Sleep wasn't working. Just behind the wall was the one he needed, the one he'd been fighting for so long. The door of the room creaked open softly, and Kathy stood on the threshold, illuminated by the moonlight from the window, wearing a light nightgown. James, what am I talking about? What am I not ready for? Yes, I've been dreaming about this almost from the moment we first met. I don't remember the moment I fell in love with you. I want to be with you now and always for the rest of my life.